All right, good evening, everybody. And on behalf of the members of the planning board and our professionals, I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's meeting of the Sparta Township Planning Board. This meeting is now called to order. It's important to note that the live stream for this meeting may be viewed at YouTube at www.youtube.com/at Sparta Township, with township being TWP. Please note that adequate public notice of this meeting was provided in accordance with the Open Publics Meeting Act. So I ask that everybody please stand and join the board and our professionals as we proudly begin this meeting with a salute to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everybody. And Ms. Fox, could you please call the roll?
Justin Pinellas.
Here.
Ernie Reichstad.
Here.
Christine Dunbar. Mike Sylvester. Vice Chairman Bill Enright. Chairman Ron Day.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti.
Here.
Joan Furman.
Here.
Jeanette Burke.
Here.
Celeste Luciano.
Here.
And Brian Zimmerman.
Here.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Tonight, I'm glad to say we have 3 sets of minutes. We'll take each one individually. So the first set of minutes is for August 7th, 2024. Would somebody like to make a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. Dory, roll call, please.
I have a couple corrections.
Oh,
I'd like to
okay,
offer.
sorry, thank you.
Sure. So I'd like to make a motion, there's 4 minor corrections. I think they're minor enough that we can still proceed. The first one is there was a approval of the July 17th minutes that were noted in these, and I abstained from that vote because I wasn't present at that July 17th meeting, so I think it just needs to be reflective that there was an abstention. Okay. The second one is there's just a word missing from the town council update that I offered during that meeting. It mentions ordinance 2407, and it refers to it as design standards. Just because it came from this board especially, I'd like to add in, it was parking design standards. The third one, I believe, according to my notes, that this meeting we also approved site plan waiver subcommittee minutes. Do you recall that?
I don't recall, but I'm not looking. This is for, which one is this, September?
August
For
7th?
August? Yeah, I don't recall.
I can go back and check.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And then the fourth one, under resolutions, there was a mixed bag of who was present that night and who was eligible to vote. I know sometimes we say that all present and eligible voted yes or approved. In this case, it just says all present. And I think there was a difference between present and eligible, so if we can just add all present and eligible voted to approve, I think that would solve the problem. And that's for the resolutions.
Okay.
So it's, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes as amended.
I'll second it.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Justin Pinellas.
Yes.
Ernie Reichstad.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti.
Yes.
Joan Furman.
Yes.
Jeanette Burke.
Yes.
Celeste Luciano.
Yes.
Brian Zimmerman.
Yes.
And yes, here.
My apologies.
That's okay. All right, the second set we have is from September 4th, 2024. Would anybody like to make a motion to accept the minutes of September 4th, 2024?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, any comments from anybody? Okay, seeing none. Dory, can I have a roll call?
Justin Pinellas.
Yes.
Ernie Reichstad.
Yes.
Chairman Ron Day.
Yes?
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti.
Yes.
Joan Furman.
Yes.
Jeanette Burke.
Yes.
Celeste Luciano.
Yes.
Brian Zimmerman.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the minutes for September 4th, 2024 are approved. I'd like to make a motion, the next set of minutes is September 18th, 2024. I've been at the dentist today, so I'm going to have a little bit of a lisp tonight, so please bear with me. It still pulls the Novic. So would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes of September 18th, 2024?
I'll make the motion. I'll second.
Any comments from anybody? Okay, seeing none, Dorian, have a roll call?
Justin Canellis?
Yes.
Ernie Ragsdale?
Yes.
Chairman Ron Day?
Yes?
Joan Furman?
Yes.
Jeanette Burke?
Yes.
Celeste Luciano?
Yes.
And Brian Zimmerman?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the minutes of September 18th, 2024 are approved. All right, the next section of the meeting is our public hearing. Tonight, we have two applications that are being continued. The first one being application Planning Board 24-721, Brainstone. The second one being application Planning Board number, application 713, Ramez and Company. So welcome back to the folks from Brainstone. If you could, come on up and if you wouldn't mind, maybe just give us a quick overview again and.
Sure.
Good evening. Oh, let me turn that on there. Good. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Daniel Benkendorf from the law firm of Askin & Hooker, representing applicant Brandstone, Juan Palicio, who is present. If I can, maybe we can have my client and my other witness sworn in before I start going through everything. Just in case they want to fill some gaps, we'll be able to run right into that. So will you guys please approach? All right.
Mr. Palicio, you understand you're still under oath, right?
Yes.
And were you sworn at the last meeting?
I was not.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And please state your name and address.
Sure. My name is Megan McMullen. I'm the CEO for Skark Inc., and my personal address is 99 High Street in Ogdensburg.
Megan, please spell your last name.
MacMullin.
And Megan, you also hold a position as the chairperson of the association for this specific property, correct?
I do now.
Okay.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I know. All right, you guys can be just seated for a second, and I'll bring you back up. All right, so the last time we were here, September 4th, 2024, my client provided testimony regarding his porcelain business. It's a porcelain fabrication company where he takes slabs of porcelain and he cuts them and then takes them to where they're going to be installed, and they're installed. He has no interaction with his clients on site. He only needed 4 parking spots. He only operates between 7:30 and 4 p.m. And as far as the waste material with respect to his company, it's all going to be kept inside the unit. He's going to load his truck inside the unit. He's going to leave with his truck. It's not actually even going to be parked outside. It's just a pickup truck anyway. And he only needed the 4 spots. He has 3 to 4 employees. And we went through all of this testimony, but unfortunately, the planning board in Sparta is trying to help clean up the township and trying to, beautify things. And so as a result of that, there were a lot of questions that the planning board had that I just couldn't answer, and I was honest with them that I couldn't answer it. So as I promised, I went back and I had conversation with the association for this specific piece of property. And I have to be honest, the previous owner really kind of dumped a big pile of, on my client and the other tenants in the building and said, here, you deal with it. And so when asking questions this evening, just remember that they're now stuck with this problem, and we're trying to fix it. We're trying to work with them and with the town to rectify the issues. So there were a couple things. I wanted to clarify, the association I didn't know was actually established as it may be a nonprofit, it may be an LLC, but we'll get the testimony with respect to that. But I had said that it was just an association, it was just a group of unit owners that got together, but ultimately it is an established company. Let's see here. Just want to make sure I go through the other issues. Okay. All right. Megan, if you'll come up and sit next to me. All right. Now, so I have a plan here. This plan, I just, for identification purposes, it is dated, I don't have that. 10/1/24, and it is prepared by Owen Dykstra, and it is the parking plan. I have colored it. It has not been submitted to the board, but I'd like to mark it for identification purposes. Mr. Collins, do you remember what number we were on? Was it A2 now, A3? Maybe even A4, because I had a couple different exhibits at the last meeting. To be safe, I could just make it A5.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
With today's date. Hold on one second, I might have.
Okay. I had written down that I had A1 through 3, but I don't think I actually presented all three of those because we stopped the meeting a little short to go through all these things. So.
I only have A1 and A2, but let's go with A5 with today's date.
Okay. All right, so I have A5, 10/2/24. Ms. McMullen, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Okay, and what is this document?
So it's a plan for the property where the 5 units are located on 26 Gale Court in
Okay.
Sparta.
Okay, and specifically, it references what specific issue on the property?
The parking.
Okay, and you'll notice colors. Do you see the colors on there?
I do.
Okay, do you understand what they're for?
Yeah.
Okay, and the yellow color represents what?
That represents SCARC.
Okay, and the green color, what does that represent?
Those are spaces reserved for the daycare center, which is the final unit of the building.
Okay, and there are green and yellow parking spaces, is that correct?
Yes.
And what do those represent?
So I believe those are the handicap, is that the?
Yep.
Handicap spots. There are 2 against the building that are obviously open to anyone, regardless of the unit they're coming into. We tend to use them more than anyone else, but those are open to anyone.
All right. Generally, they're shared between SCARC and the childcare, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And that's the green and yellow.
Yeah.
And then there's 4 pink spots down in the corner, and what do those represent?
Those are the spots that we have at least tentatively reserved for Mr. Palacio, as they are in the back of the building and near the back entrance to his unit. And those were the spots that would work best for him. So we just reserve those for him.
All right. And presently, have you had any issues with parking on site?
No.
Okay. All right. So,
Dan Dory was able to find that we had 3 exhibits from the other night, so you can go ahead and make this A4.
yeah, and those are the notes that I had.
I'm
too.
sorry, I couldn't hear.
A4.
That this is now A4
Okay,
because
thanks.
we have confirmation from our secretary that the other night we had 3 exhibits.
That's because Dory is great. Okay, so here is the official parking plan for the property. I wanted to make sure that everybody got to see that. Currently, there are no issues with the parking, although it seems like a high use because it's a daycare and SCARC. You know, really, the daycare and SCARC get along just fine, and we're only taking 4 of those spots from the rest of the property. Now, I also wanted to mention that there were some issues, and we'll get into this. There were some issues with regard to landscaping and things. Ms. McMullen, you had conversation with Mr. Dunn, and what did you guys come to conclude?
I just wanted to say historically, this is actually one of the reasons we like the ordinance, because we've made requests in the past to have some of these issues attended to, and they just have not been attended to on behalf of the association. So we're actually excited to get a lot of this in place because for any of you that know SCARC properties, we tend to take pride in our properties, and this was not one that we were particularly happy with at the current time. So we're excited to be taking this project on and sprucing it up and making it a better location. So what we discussed today was landscaping, was maybe some new signage for the building, I don't know if you want to talk about stop signs, but we very much support those as well. And certainly the retention basin that's on the property and getting that cleaned out and presentable as it should be. So we discussed today, myself and Jason Dunn, about trying to keep up with what the expectations are regarding landscaping and, obviously making sure that everything on the property is as it should be. So we have made preliminary plans that we will put in place as quickly as we can to abide by some of those issues.
And so, just to be clear, if the board looks kindly upon my client's application this evening, it will be conditioned upon a landscape plan being prepared, reviewed, and approved by Mr. Simmons, as well as an as-built survey or site plan, we'll call it, of the property, because none of the plans that we have actually have all of the conditions contained on the property. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we can expect that those items would be completed within 3 months, 2 months? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're working with the weather plan at this point on the landscaping, but for the most part, I mean, we've already gotten proposals in on landscaping changes and the retention basin. Obviously, our one hurdle is there's items on the property that are unsightly that belong to the prior owner, and we're getting a little bit of reluctance there as far as the timeline to get those off there, but we're going to just continue to push on that. And if he, for some reason, does not comply, we will actually take care of that ultimately and get those items off the property. So I would say this fall is our plan. I will say that, I've read through the town's ordinances, and I'm reading through the landscape plan. I will just ask for a little bit of attention for us as a nonprofit. We do not have a ton of money set aside for a brand-new landscape plan on the property, but we will, do as much as we can, and if we may need to boost that into the spring, I can certainly let you know once we have a final plan in place.
So specifically, you're requesting for a waiver of the design plan requirements in the ED zone
Right.
For this property. Although we are intending on providing a landscape plan for the property, we are requesting a waiver from strict compliance with the design waiver standards.
Yeah, I mean, just, we will
the design
obviously,
standards,
we
yeah.
will obviously make it a more beautiful place. Just for budgetary purposes, we only have so much in a fiscal year to spend on landscaping. So, we will go through the process of getting probably materials donated, and we have some friends who can help us out with that. But once we get the plan finalized, you guys can decide whether or not it's appropriate for any waiver of any of the requirements.
Okay, and just so the board's clear, I want to go through some strict or some specific condition requirements for approval this evening. So the property, all the debris, garbage, everything is going to be cleaned up from the property. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and there are dumpsters on the site. All but one large dumpster is going to be removed from the site.
Our plan with Blue Diamond is to have one garbage dumpster, which will service our units as well as the daycare, because they indicated to us that they're going to be leaving Waste Management and moving over to Blue Diamond. So we will work that out with Blue Diamond to make sure we have something that suits both of us. And then if we're required to have a recycle bin, we will have one on the property that's shared.
And so if there are dumpsters, let's say 1, 2 dumpsters, no matter how many dumpsters there are, they're going to be enclosed
Yes.
in a dumpster enclosure.
Yes, and we already have a plan in place to redo the enclosure for the dumpsters.
So you're totally rebuilding the dumpster enclosure as
Yeah.
far as the fencing around the outside?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And there's also, we talked about it briefly, but just the retention basin.
Yeah.
It is your intention to completely remove all of the trees and brush and everything from that and clean it out and maintain it as part of the association?
Yes.
Okay. And you also talked about the stop sign installation. You did
Yeah.
agree to have stop signs put at the exits of each one of the...
Yeah, we've actually already have the signs. My one question actually was just if there's any requirements for distance from the entrance, or somebody can help me and point me in the right direction
Yeah.
of those rules, I'm happy to comply with them, but we have everything we need to install them. I just didn't want to install them and then have them be in the wrong place.
Yeah, and I think working with Jason Dunn will help
Yeah.
get you to that part. And then additionally, lighting. Although the lighting is seasonal, generally, the lights are off at 10 and back, are off at 10 and back on at 6 in the morning, and then obviously turn off with the light.
Yeah, we've already reset the lighting timers, so that's actually already in compliance.
Okay. All right, and another condition of approval, something that I was unable to obtain this evening, were the architectural plans. I literally pulled into the driveway, and at the same time, the previous owner pulled into the driveway with an armful of old architectural plans that he basically dumped through the window of my car. So it is my intention to contact the architects, who happens to be either maybe a cousin or brother or something of the previous owner, Matthew Samantha, you guys might know him. He's the one that did the architectural, so it's my intention, and if the board again looks kindly upon the application this evening, we will provide the architecturals from at least my client's unit so that you have copies of those architecturals. And that would be a condition of approval so that we don't have to come back again a third time. At least this will set a groundwork for what we're trying to do here. Again, I believe my client and probably the rest of the unit owners are kind of held hostage by what the previous owner did, and I don't want that to be the case. And my client knows that he has things that he needs to get done, but at the same time, he wants to start moving things into this unit because he's done with another unit. So he doesn't want to reinstitute a new lease or start on a month-to-month basis on an old property that he's no longer going to be working in. So he wants to start working. That's why we're here tonight. That's why we didn't want to push the application. Okay. If the board has any questions for my witness, now would be a great time.
Okay, let me, if I could, Mrs. Simmons, do you have any questions? Why don't we start with our professionals? And
Mr. Chairman and board members, just referring to my report of August 5th, 2024 on this application, the items that the applicant's attorney just went over were basically the ones that I had pointed out as far as information that we really didn't have things on. With regards to the parking, I've just seen it tonight for the first time with everyone. But again, they're delineating where everyone's going to be, so I think that helps bring some organization to it, especially since the ceramic cutting tenant proposes to only use 4 spaces, and they're in the back of the building, which will help. Excuse me. With regards to the dumpsters, again, when I was out there on site, excuse me, when I was out there on site, there were several dumpsters, and I think it's a good thing that there's only going to be 1 or maybe 2, and I'm in agreement with reconstructing and building a new enclosure because the one that was there was not in great shape. So that's a definite plus. The stop signs are a safety issue, and again, they indicated they're going to put them up. And with regards to the landscape plan, excuse me, again, I think it's a good thing that because it was basically just grass and the detention basin that was out on site had been overgrown, it should be maintained as they indicated they're going to do for purposes of making sure the basin works properly and plus an aesthetic standpoint. With regards to any other signage, the one question I had, was your client going to put any new facade signage on, or did I hear something about new signage?
I had meant, if you don't mind, sorry. Yeah, no, go ahead. I had just mentioned this, one of the things we were talking about today, or I was talking today with Jason Dunn about, was one of the ways to maybe improve the visual effect of the property is to create more of like a stone or some sort of sign for the property where we would have the names of, obviously, the companies on the property.
As opposed to that existing freestanding sign?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
That sign is not necessarily the most pleasant.
But that's not part of the application tonight. They'd have
No,
to go back
that would be-
before with a permit
Yeah.
request and go through the proper steps.
So-
My client came to the board, actually, we're not even intending to have a sign. The only thing that's going to be there is the name on the door, and that's it.
Okay.
because no one's going to be coming for my client. That was my client's testimony at the last meeting. But with respect to this sign, I think what needs to happen is we need to put some plans together.
Yeah.
Jason, we need to do that and maybe file it under a new application or a permit.
Okay.
We would consider
I
that
just
like a
wanted to
phase
clarify
two.
that for the board so you knew what was included or not included with this
Yeah.
particular application.
Yep, thank you for that.
Yeah, and then the only other thing is, we did discuss previously as far as any waste material, that was going to be from the ceramic polishing and cutting operation, that was going to be properly disposed in an authorized facility as needed, correct?
Correct, absolutely.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Samard?
Thank you very much. As it regards to the parking, you probably have a good familiarity with how the parking scheme currently operates.
Yeah.
And is parking ever a problem on the site?
The only time it's not an issue because we know about it, is Halloween at the daycare.
Okay,
Because there's a parade, and we typically would just park off-site. We would ask a neighbor if we can park there, but for the most part, the two tenants, or the two owners, the daycare and us, we've worked over time about the best way to have vehicles in and out in the morning and in the afternoon, because it's really a drop-off and pickup timeframe that can get problematic, because the two, they don't really overlap, but sometimes parents are late or early or whatever. So we've worked it out so that, as you can see, the far side, away from the building in the front, is where we typically have our staff park. And then the spots along the building are more people that actually have to pull in and either pick somebody up or drop somebody off. That way we don't have any SCARC participants or small children really crossing the property or the parking lot. So we really have not had an issue with that. We keep our SCARC vehicles in the back of the building, so that's not an issue in the primary front parking lot. We've kind of worked it out based on how the flow goes, so it really has not been a problem.
when you say SCARC vehicles, you mean like larger, like buses or?
Sometimes it's it's a accessible minivan or sort of a mid-size van. We have only one or two larger lift vehicles that come in, but they never come into the front of the building. They only go in the back.
Would you be amenable to the board requiring that those vehicles be parked at the back of the site, just to
I don't have a
maintain the
problem.
kind of
Yeah, we don't-
circulation? and-
I should have pointed it out. So when you're looking at this plan, there's a specific reference to vans, and there's 7 of them. There's actually 7 spots for vans. There's 4 spots for SCARC vehicles. They're like cars, whatever. And there's no vans permitted in the front.
Okay.
I will say that in the front, we have, I'm trying to explain it the right way. We do have 2 vans that are not minivans. They're basically like an 8-passenger van.
Renter?
That we will, it almost looks like a locksmith truck or
Okay.
a small, just a van that only has 8 seats in it, that we will use those, typically use those first 2 spots away from the building. Nope, the back parking area. No, sorry, front of the building, but not against the building. You want me to, this is easier. Yeah. So we will park them right here.
Okay.
And that's where they will stay, just because it's easy in, easy out. And those are used for like activities for that particular day. So if they're gonna go out into the community, those are the 2 vehicles they would use, and we park them right at the front, so it's easy in, easy out.
Okay. And I don't mean to get into the topic of the entirety of the site or the building or anything, and I know this is, an application for a tenant change, but I just want to make sure that the 4 spaces that are delineated for this tenant are adequate, simply because, the owner or operator has mentioned that there are 3 or 4 employees, and if that ever grew by 1, you're short on spaces already. So I just want to guarantee or just make it clear that the parking scheme is well thought out and that the, if there is a need for signage or pavement markings or something like that in the future, that maybe that's something that is thought out.
We've thought about that, and actually, we've talked to the other tenant, or the other owner, about whether or not we really need to mark the spaces. But usually every September, there's new families that come in, so it's just there's a little bit of a learning curve, but we always address it. I know they address it in their sort of back-to-school night. If he were to need another space or 2 in the back, we would be able to accommodate that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yep.
As far as the landscaping, I heard your comment about looking through the ordinance. I appreciate you looking through the ordinance. That is a newer ordinance provision for this zone. It does have intentions to kind of soften more industrial sites. What I do think in looking at your site is it has a lot of green space in the front and on the sides. There is some landscaping, some existing trees. They're not quite mature yet, but there's some trees between the buildings. And I think the site will best benefit from landscaping at the front of the building, where it will soften kind of the foundation, exposed foundation. It'll kind of fill out that area.
Yeah.
I think a new sign will definitely improve what's there today.
Yeah.
So I think those are all positives in the long term, and I think that they'll all enhance kind of the site, and it'll be a good outcome from just tenant change here. So we appreciate you taking the steps to look into that and to improve the site.
I will just say on the front of the building, I know this particular plan, when we talk about landscaping, the roof is a metal roof, so when it rains or snows, the actual water kind of goes flying off, like it goes out. So right along the foundation is a very difficult place to plant. But we've talked about river rock, we've talked about other things that would make it aesthetically pleasing, maybe other than plants that look really nice for the first month and then not so good after that. So, and I'm happy to submit those ideas and plans as we make them to the board if they want it. So I just wanted to give you an idea of where we can plant and maybe something else, some other idea for against the building.
Yeah, I appreciate you, giving it the thought. I don't think they need to be right up against the building. I think that because you have such good lawn space up
Yeah.
between the right-of-way and the building, that you do have
Yep.
an opportunity to visually screen something without it having to be right up the building. So we'd rather have alive plants that do their job than,
Yeah.
dead plants that
Yeah,
get squished by
exactly.
the rain. And that's all I had. Thank you.
I'm going to say Catherine touched on most of everything I was going to question, but I do want to thank you for taking the initiative to spruce up the property.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
yeah, no, it's a big deal for us too, so we're happy to do it.
Thank you.
I don't have anything at the moment. Thank you.
Same. Thank you.
I had a question from last time, but it really would be for your client.
I might know the answer.
Okay. It was all the dust that was being collected through the tubes, and it was going to be disposed of into the garbage. And he was going to check to see if there was someplace that would accept that material rather than going into a dump site.
Oh, yeah. You want to talk about that?
So, porcelain doesn't produce a lot of dust compared to granite or quartz. It's very minimal, but if I can't find a job site, it's basically like a 20-pound bag that I could put in the pickup truck and just dispose it in one of the facilities that we normally just throw it in, because it actually converts it into like a solid mass that's in a bag.
Okay.
And then we could just dump it where we want. They usually just accept it in the regular garbage. It's not gonna be anything that's gonna bother them we've done it in the regular garbage.
Take it to the dump in Sussex County, in Lafayette,
Yeah.
and they would know what to do with it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question or two. Thank you for everything you shared tonight. Talk about parking for a second again. What is the current tenant or the last tenant that was in that Unit A, I believe it's called? How many employees and how many parking spaces were they using?
It was actually, I don't think there was a business in there, to be honest. I think he may have been living in there because there was a child going out to a bus stop, actually, there. So there was nobody really in there except the one gentleman, and he wasn't there all the time, but was there some of the time. So there really was no impact to any of that. He had one car when he was there.
And on the books, it shows a vinyl printing facility, but we don't know how many tenants there were. Like how many people there were, like how many employees or how many cars were parked there regularly.
It really was. It was one car. It was a gentleman, maybe one other adult, and a child.
Okay.
Which is kind of awkward.
Yeah.
So with the understanding, should this be approved with conditions tonight, is, of course, you understand that if the tenant mix changed in the future,
Yeah.
then we'd have to go back again and look at who are the 5 tenants, what are the parking
Sure.
requirements per tenant, add them up, make sure there's enough spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, at that, depending, I mean, we own, obviously, the middle of the building, there's 3 units. I mean, it's a day program site, and it's based on the ratio of the individuals we have going there. There's a certain number of staff that are required for the number of people we have in the program. So, I mean, if there was some major change, we would probably start looking around. But that's fine. I mean, it's never really been an issue up to this point.
And while you're talking about the association, can you just give us a quick summary? Is it a LLC? How is it structured? It was alluded to in the beginning.
Yeah, it's an LLC. We don't really have any of the materials yet. I've made the request. There's a association bank account. We have no access to it yet. I have no idea what's in there, how much is in there. I mean, I know what we've paid over time, but I have no idea what's in there and what's been reserved. There are documents, there are insurance, there's insurance on the building, which, quite honestly, we had to rely on because of some water issues at one point. So we know that's legit, and so I have a good working relationship with the agent there. They know that we're going to be assuming responsibility for that. I just don't really have any of the documents yet. And if we don't get them, we will find them and recreate the file. So the members, which is myself, the owners of the daycare center, and the current applicant, we've already met. We've had a meeting where we've decided, once we know what's going on here, we'll get together, we'll establish whatever rules and regulations need to be established under the rules of the association.
So it's the association legally that's agreeing to these commitments that
Correct.
were mentioned earlier?
Correct.
Right, okay, not the client? not
That's
the
correct.
tenant, Okay. Last question is just something for consideration. You mentioned the lighting.
Yes.
And that going off between 10 PM and 6 AM. The 10 PM number, is there, what's the thinking around 10 instead of earlier? Is
It was
there any-
arbitrary.
Arbitrary, yeah.
So, I mean, if there's some other time, I mean, typically, we discussed the activity on the property. Obviously, the daycare is daycare hours. For our purposes, we use the programs during the day for a day program. Sometimes we do use it for programming in the afternoon or early evening, but we would never be there after probably 9 o'clock. So 10 o'clock was sort of an arbitrary time. So if there's some other time, we can certainly consider that.
Some applicants or some tenants agree to, or, at dusk or an hour past dusk, things like that, to make it a little bit earlier to cut down on some of the light pollution if it's not going to be used in the evening heavily.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, they're on a timer right now, so certainly based on the time of year, we can adjust and make it earlier, this time of year, so that the lights aren't on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
That's all I have.
Just a couple quick ones. So, number one, I'd like, along with everybody else, thank you for what you're doing here. There's an existing building there, and this is really a new tenant that's bringing you here.
Yeah.
And as part of this, it sounds like you're willing to do some landscape improvements, and if that was to be worked with Mr. Simmons, and if it was to be looked at favorably from the board, I guess the agreement would be that if you weren't able to reach an agreement, you come back to the board and we'd resolve it there.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay. That's the only question. Oh, one more. And then you had mentioned you were thinking about doing some sign changes.
Maybe, yeah.
So if you were to do that, then that would be submitted to the minor site plan subcommittee for approval.
Correct,
Okay,
yeah.
but it's not
I
part
would
of the
see that as
application
sort of a
today.
phase two. We're going to try and get in compliance with what the board prefers at this point, and then we'll work on that as phase two.
Okay, thank you. That's all the
But we're
questions.
not doing this in phases, just to make,
Let me say that's on behalf of the association.
All right, thank you. Ernie?
The advantage of going next to last, everything's I had has been asked and answered, so thank you.
Yeah, same for me. Just thanks for your time and your partnership. I think as a result, the site's only going to be improved from here. So we thank you, and thanks for your work for it.
No problem. You're welcome.
I do have one thing.
Sure.
With the landscape plan and seeing as though Chris Dunbar isn't here, Native species.
Yes.
Is really what we're
I'm a
going to be
big fan.
looking for when it comes to a landscape plan.
We choose our landscapers, we have 4 of them based on all of our properties, so we have some requirements on what can be planted and not planted, so.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one other item while you're working on putting your documents together, Mr. Collins reminded me, it would be a good time to prepare a maintenance plan for the detention basin, and we should have that in order to comply with the current DEP regulations, have that filed in the county clerk's office. That way everyone knows just what's required from here on in. Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would also just ask, I know in the past, the meeting that happened prior, the association, which if I can provide the address for SCARC, if letters, it can be directed to my attention, just so we have something to follow along with regarding the requirements, that would be great. I can provide that.
Okay, Mr. Pengendorf?
I have no further witnesses.
Okay, let's open it up to the public. Any questions from the public?
Or testimony.
I'm sorry, Tom?
Questions or comments?
Okay, thank you, yes, questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I guess, Tom, if you could help us formulate a list of conditions?
Yes, the board might consider a motion to approve the amended preliminary and final site plan for Brandstone as requested and as discussed in the hearings, subject to the standard conditions and subject to the condition that they'll, the condominium association will submit a native species landscape plan, which will be prepared for review and approval of the board engineer, and they'll also submit a as-built plan. And those will be submitted within 3 months of today. The board is granting this relief from the new details of the landscaping design ordinance to the extent that because this is an existing facility and the proposed changes are modest in scope. Applicant or the condominium association will remove all debris and garbage from the site. All dumpsters except one dumpster will be removed, and if necessary, a recycling bin will be used, and those will be kept inside a dumpster enclosure, which shall be rebuilt with new fencing. They will clean and maintain the detention basin and record a standard detention basin maintenance manual. They'll install stop signs at the exits. The lights will be turned off at least no later than 1/2 hour after close of business. They'll provide a copy of the prior architectural plan to the board within 60 days. There'll be no hazardous materials used on the site or disposed of on the site or in the septic system. There'll be no floor drains. If the condominium association decides to submit a plan for a new monument or freestanding sign for the site, then that sign can be submitted for the review and approval of the minor site plan subcommittee. They'll comply with the parking plans submitted as A4, and there'll be no large vans or large vehicles parked in the front parking lot, and such large vans or large vehicles shall be parked in the rear parking lot. And those are the conditions that I had, Mr. Chairman.
Does anybody else have any others?
The retention basin was going to be cleaned out, but then, as David, you were mentioning, it should be filed at the county clerk's office.
That's right, that's
He
the
said
maintenance
that,
Oh,
plan.
we did say
Yep.
that?
Mr. Collins, the only thing, I think you mentioned if they were to do a freestanding sign, but that would also apply if you were to do any new building signs as well, that you'd still have to come to the,
That'd be fine.
Agreed.
okay. Okay, based on the amendment as just discussed, would anybody like to make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Any comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti,
Yes.
Jeanette Burke,
Yes.
Joan Furman,
Yes.
Justin Canellis,
Yes.
Celeste Luciano,
Yes.
Ernie Ragsdale,
Yes.
Brian Zimmerman,
Yes.
Chairman Ronde.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, we'll just confirm, I don't think you have to have another vote, but we'll confirm this, that this is effective this evening, so the tenant can move in and operate effective immediately, provided all other requirements are met. It's pretty straightforward here, because it's just a change in tenant.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you very
and,
much, ladies and gentlemen.
Good luck.
Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thank you. This is yours, Dave, right?
Okay, that then brings us to the second hearing, which is also a continuation for Planning Board Application 713, Ramaz Company LLC. Will the folks from Ramaz Company please come forward?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Michael Salvaggi from Lavery, Salvaggi, Cohen, on behalf of the applicant. As you correctly noted, this is a continuation of a hearing that began, I believe, in August. This is the property, Lot 1, Block 5019.
Apologies, would you mind using the?
Oh. Okay. So this is the property, Lot 1, Block 5019, address 61 Sparta Avenue. Many of you probably know it as the Sparta Pharmacy Lot. When we were here last month, and just to backtrack, the application is seeking some bulk variance relief to allow an 1,100 square foot vacant space on the property and a 1,400 square space on the property to be available for restaurants. Restaurants are permitted in the zone. However, this property does not have, when we filed, available parking. And that was kind of the focus of the discussion last time we were here. We have revised the plans and have created some additional parking. We've also, you'll hear tonight, limited the space so that the restaurant space does not exceed the available parking. We also have a representative for the applicant tonight who owns the property next door, which is a chiropractor on the first floor, you'll hear, and there's 2 apartments above it. The applicant is prepared to, since he controls both properties, give a cross easement to allow for parking, which we would submit would eliminate that concern. So what I'd like to do is to, before we get to the applicant's representative, to kind of keep the continuity going, Mr. Nader, who was the engineer on the project, who was sworn in last time, is here. He will discuss the changes that were made. Then we'll go to the applicant's representative. We have our architect, and then we also have our planner. So, Mr. Nader, you were put under oath last time, correct?
Correct, yes.
And in the last 2 months, your license hasn't been forfeited or lost, correct?
No.
Okay. So you can continue to testify as an expert in the area of civil engineering. So, Mr. Nader, why don't you start out by walking us through. I think the last plan revision day was September 15th, I believe.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
September.
Now, what you're showing here is, I don't believe we submitted it in color, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
Yes.
So I believe, Mr. Chairman, we're going to have to mark this. And I believe, I'm trying to see, I don't know if we marked any exhibits last time. So if I'm correct, this would be A1. And Mr. Nader, what is A1?
A1 is a color rendering of the site plan, which is sheet C-03. It is part of the site plan submission that we made, except we added a little bit of color to try to give you a little bit better view of what's going on the property.
All right, so why don't we describe then what we're looking at here?
Sure, absolutely. So what we have is basically the property in itself. We described it last time at our last meeting, almost a trapezoidal shape for that property. We have an access off Sparta Avenue. That access provides vehicular access as well as pedestrian access into the property. And as you come in from Sparta Avenue, and I'm looking in the direction of northeast in this direction, you basically make a left into where the parking area is for the vehicles. So you've got a run of parking, approximately 8 parking spaces that are facing onto Sparta Avenue. And then as you continue traveling in a northerly, northwesterly direction, you have an additional 6 parking spaces. Let's count them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parking spaces that are facing Route 181, or 517, I'm sorry, Route 517. And then over to the right of that would be additionally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parking spaces that are facing the existing structure that is situated on the property.
2 of those are handicap, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
They're identified on the plan as handicap parking spaces. Now, as you come in the driveway, if you continue straight back, again in a northeasterly direction, you have 3 parallel parking that are adjacent to the building, almost to the rear of the building or to the side of the building. And the property ends basically or terminates into an undeveloped property behind us. What we have proposed is 3 additional parallel parking, 25 through or 23 through 25, that are on the side of the building again. And in addition to that, we have a head-on parking to the property in the rear, 6 parking spaces that basically provide for additional parking as suggested and recommended last time we were here before you. We have delineated an area for a loading. This area basically is currently being utilized as a parking and potentially loading in here. It's not necessarily designated on the pavement as such, but we plan to do so. In addition to that, we have the existing compressors that are for the HVAC that are located almost at the terminus of the building, at the north corner of the building in the back, in the rear and here. And that's pretty much the use on the property.
All right, so how many spaces does A1 identify now on the property?
So we have a total, as indicated on the plan in here, of 32 spaces.
Okay. And the spaces themselves, the size of those spaces, are they compliant with township requirements, or do some of these spaces require design waivers of any kind?
They do require design waivers. I mean, they are existing spaces. They've been part of this development for years. There's never been any complaining about the ability to park and exit the vehicle safely and access the property safely. They do meet, certain ones meet the requirements, others are slightly shy of the requirements, as indicated by the engineer's letter. Certainly, we've been to the site and we see that as well.
But we didn't, in order to generate additional parking spaces, we didn't shrink the size of the existing spaces to squeeze out a couple of more spots, did we?
No, absolutely not. We did not touch any of the existing spaces that are shown left of the entrance driveway facing 517 and facing the side of the building that faces 517.
All right. Now, on A1, and I don't think it's identified, I guess the purple is the building itself.
That is correct,
All right.
yes.
And where are how is that property internally split up? I know the architect will go into it, but I think just to help orient the board as to the space and where the parking is for it.
So the two vacant units are basically, they are shown on this plan. They're the two corner units. One is a southern unit, and it is depicted again on this exhibit A1. And the other one is the northern unit, leaving the pharmacy, the Sparta Pharmacy, which would be, if you grid this building, it would be to the left or to the west of that center grid.
Okay. And the approximate sizes of the three spaces?
I would say that one of the space is 1,400 square feet, and the other space is 1,100 square feet. So the northerly one is 1,400 square feet. It's slightly bigger than the southerly one, which is about 1,100 square feet.
Okay. Now, you had an opportunity prior to the night to review Mr. Simmons's September 30th, report, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right. And I think perhaps we may want to walk through that just to address some of the concerns or issues that he's raised. Beginning on page 2, he talks about the site plan, and he asks if there are any cross easement between these two properties. Your company did the surveying for this property, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right. And did you, when doing the title search and everything else, did you come across any cross easements between this lot and the adjacent lot?
When we're saying the adjacent lot, the one
Yes.
across from us, there is no cross easement between them, but there is an easement that crosses between the
Perfect.
two properties.
Okay.
Yes.
And that easement, as far as you could glean from the review of the available records, was provided for what reason?
As we understand it, I mean, we dug deep into existing deed information to try to establish where that property boundary is and the genesis behind it. Basically, this easement was, in my opinion, created to provide access potentially to the property in the rear, the undeveloped property in the rear.
Okay. Now, Mr. Simmons had talked about, will we be able to maintain that access in the event it ever was developed by virtue of what you've done here? And he talked about, the parking and perhaps the narrowing of that easement area.
It's hard to understand and plan as to what can potentially come in the rear in here and is proposed or could be proposed in the back. So in addition to that, it's difficult to actually cast an opinion whether they do have an access somewhere else onto 517 or another access onto the shopping center beyond. So I don't know to what level of intensity this can be utilized. However, though, having said that, I did stop at the site before I came here tonight, and ironically, there was a vehicle parked in one of those parallel spaces, and there was a large, full-size pickup truck parked across from it, directly facing the building, across from our site. And I did step out of the car, and I measured the dimension between them. It measured approximately 20 feet as they exist today or tonight as they were parked. So is 20 feet, logically enough to allow for two-way traffic? The state of New Jersey allows you to use 20 feet for two-way traffic. Granted, it's mostly for residential, but then again, residential, as proposed, you expect to have vehicles of all different sizes that would be traveling on that road. So is it enough in 20 feet to allow vehicles to go back and forth? Yes, in my opinion, it would be enough.
All
And
right.
by the way, that vehicle that was parked parallel was about almost 3 feet away from the building itself. So, certainly any more encroachment closer to the building would give additional space for the traveling vehicles.
All right. Now, sticking with the parking, Mr. Simmons, in his comment B, talked about spaces 23 through 25. and those are the spaces, I guess, directly behind the building?
Yes.
And talked about if those were to be utilized, it would actually block the doorway for deliveries to the back of that building. What's your view on that? I mean, is that correct? Is there a workaround?
So there is a doorway towards the rear of the building in the back where parking number 25 is identified. Our anticipation, more than likely, is that these parking spaces would be utilized for employees, as Mr. Simmons suggested or recommended. So if there is a delivery, and depending on the type of delivery, generally speaking, for restaurant delivery, more than likely there would be morning deliveries. They're not going to be, afternoon or evening deliveries. You want to bring the food nice and fresh so you could prep for the daily activities. So with that being said, there should not be any issue or problem basically occupying that space, accessing that doorway, getting into the building during that timeline.
Okay. Along those same lines, he had suggested that spaces 27 through 32, which I guess are the far back, correct?
Correct, yes.
All right. Be dedicated for employee parking only. I mean, there's no problem us designating that, or you could do some signage or something there to show that?
We certainly can. I mean, this is a very much disturbed area. We did take the board's recommendation last time to heart, and we did go out there and look at it, and we are basically identified that being, one, it's disturbed, two, it's got quite a bit of stone that is on the ground surface of it, and it's partially paved as well, so we decided to create more of a delineated parking areas that can be or would be for employees, yes.
Okay. Now, I think we addressed about the aisle width of 24 feet behind 90-degree parking.
It's the existing condition, as we alluded to last time, basically where parking space number 19, the way that the curb is delineated, it does tend to encroach closer to that parking space, basically bringing in that dimension closer to 20 feet rather than 24 feet. But as we've stated, again, for someone to be able to exit, they can exit with a 20-foot. We're certainly happy to provide a template to the engineer so they could see how the vehicles do exit. And again, they currently use that parking, and there is never any issue that I'm aware of that the client had mentioned to me that they cannot exit from this specific location.
Okay. We talked about comment number E, or letter E, sorry. Talked about the minimum parking space size of 180 square feet. He notes that spaces 9 through 13 are a little bit below that, as well as some spaces between numbers 2 and 8. But your testimony, as we said earlier, I mean, that's not a condition we've created. I mean, that's, as far as you can tell, a pre-existing condition, correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. With regards to spaces 27 through 32, those are the ones in the back, Mr. Simmons had noted that perhaps there was some stormwater management that would need it to be accompanied with the development of that area for parking pursuant to Township Ordinance 21-02. Have you looked into that? I mean, is there a need for stormwater management in that area? And if so, or if not, why?
Well, again, as an engineer, an opinion, I without going into a whole lot of detail, but a partial segment of all of this parking from 27 to 32 is already paved. Another big portion of it is actually a stone area or a gravel area. It is being utilized at the present time. It leaves only a partial of parking 27, 28, and 29, although it's not necessarily identified as either paved or stone cover, but it is disturbed and it is basically cut down. And I'm not going to say it's well-maintained, no, that's not the case, but it is an area that is being used at the present time. So if you really want to be picky, you could look at 27, 28, and 29, only that portion of it that doesn't have necessarily a hard surface such as pavement. And if we do add that paved area in here, that basically will constitute the additional impervious cover, in my opinion, which falls below the 500 square feet, not all these spaces that would be added impervious cover.
Okay. Now, in comment letter F, Mr. Simmons talks about it's not clear that the available parking can handle the additional parking requirements for the two restaurants, both from the number of spaces dimensionally and for maneuverability. And then he asks you to kind of opine as to whether, I guess in layman's terms, will this site work based on your design?
What I could say is that the site currently works. It is a developed property. It does have an underutilized building on it, does have parking as was previously designed, previously reviewed and approved by this distinguished board. And currently and prior, and hopefully in the future, everything will operate the same way that it has been operating. So my opinion is yes.
Now, let me ask you, if the applicant who controls the property to, I guess it's to the south, were to grant a cross easement and allow access back and forth for purposes of parking, would that further buttress your argument that this site would work if there was that relief valve, if you will, for additional parking next door?
Yes, absolutely. Currently, the use on the property across or south of our property basically is a, remind me, what's downstairs? It's a chiropractor downstairs with 2 apartments, single-bedroom apartments upstairs. And there are substantial number of parking in the front and the rear and here that would be more than enough to handle basically the use within this existing building, leaving an overflow ability for potential users from the property that we're currently before you to use those spaces.
Now, let me ask you, is there anything, I mean, what's the terrain between these buildings? Would there be anything that would inhibit or complicate somebody parking on the lot next door and walking over to pick up a pizza or whatever is going to be served at this potential restaurant?
It honestly, again, I was there yet again tonight. It's pretty flat. There is no slope that is basically conditioning yourself to go up 10% or more between them. There are no retaining walls. There's no physical structural obstacle that would prevent anyone from parking on this lot in here. When I say this lot, would be lot 52, block 19.03, and cutting across to our proposed lot for this application.
Okay, now, one of the things that Mr. Simmons had talked about is the lighting. In your estimation, I mean, is there adequate lighting, forgetting for a moment access from the property next door, but as currently proposed, this parking area and the uses that the applicant is hoping to secure, is there enough lighting to traverse the property safely, in your opinion?
Yes.
All right. What's the lighting that's out there that supports your position that there is enough?
Again, I was there tonight, and I drove down in this direction, which is northeasterly to westerly direction to the rear, where proposed parking 27 through 32 are. There was ample lighting in here that I was able to see, step out of my vehicle, walk down in this area in here, adjacent to proposed parking 25, 24, and 23. I walked back in this direction. There was ample light between these 2 buildings. And then again, I walked over in the front direction, and there was ample light in the front direction. Now, certainly, we're happy to talk to the engineer that if he feels we need to have any additional lighting to improve on it or add to it or supplement what we have currently on the property, we're happy to look into that and add where potentially may be areas that are much darker than other areas.
All right. And I apologize for the board. When we were talking about the drainage, I should have asked you this question. Mr. Simmons did ask about an existing drainage grade on the property near parking lot, or parking space number 26. I think it's noted on your plan.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yes. Yep.
And he asks, where does that water go? Do you have any idea what that drainage grade is for, and where does the water go?
I don't know where it goes. I was looking to see if there's any existing information to try to get my hands on it. We don't have enough information to see where this goes. So we'll have to do some additional digging to find out where it goes.
Okay. I believe the balance of the issues raised by Mr. Simmons would be addressed by our architect and, excuse me, I'm sorry. The signage on page 5, he talks about one that was noted that there was a billboard.
There's a freestanding sign in the grass area in the front.
Is it a billboard?
When you say billboard, in other words, is it a lit-up sign, you mean, or?
Well, is it, what's the dimensions of the sign? Maybe that's a better way of asking the question.
Well, the reason why we did not really detail that sign, because we were not planning to use it or expand on it. We were proposing to have signs directly on the building for the restaurants, and that's what we showed as part of our site plan submission. So we did not detail anything on the existing sign, as we did not propose to modify it, whether height or width. It's an existing sign that is currently in place.
All right, and that sign would be one that would be removed as part of this application? Is that the proposal?
No, that sign basically covers the building. It does have the pharmacy shown on it.
So what are the dimensions of that sign then? I mean, do you know?
I don't know
Preston?
offhand what the dimensions are.
Okay.
It's a small sign. There
All
was an application, that's why our application is amended. There was an application a few years back to basically increase the height of that sign that was granted and, add the pharmacy and others.
So that sign is not going to change dimensionally? It'll remain the same except what's going to be on it?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Simmons asked, there's 2 proposed facade signs for the restaurants. Do you know, and maybe this is a question for the architect, will those signs be lit, and if so, how?
So there will be lighting on those signs, but not lit. In other words, they won't be lit up from
Backlit.
behind, but there will be directional lighting that would be on them.
Okay. And, Mr. Chairman, I think with that, I have no further questions for Mr. Nader.
All right, Mr. Sims, I'm going to start with you again, just because I think a lot of your concerns were addressed, so any additional questions based on the testimony you heard tonight, or any clarification needed?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Again, referring to the report I prepared dated September 30th, 2024. With regards to the parking demand for the 2 restaurants, the one question I think we need some clarification on, I did note that the areas that have been set aside for the 2 restaurants were quantified in the parking calculations, and in some areas, there was different areas on the plan sheet. And if I understood the testimony right tonight, you're talking about limiting the areas for the restaurants in order to help reduce the parking demand.
That is correct, yes.
So I think it's important ultimately, if the board were to consider this, that we have a detailed plan that shows the dimensions of which areas are going to be able to be used. We've had restaurants in other municipalities where they went into an existing rental area like you described, but there were certain areas where it was off limits, if you will. It couldn't be developed with additional seats or dining area or what have you, and that satisfied that condition, and it also quantified it so that if the zoning officer was going in or anyone else to check on things, they knew what was allowed and what wasn't.
Right,
Okay?
And we will have that, our architect will present that as an exhibit, based on your comments in this.
With regards to the loading space and in the back of the property as far as employee parking, I suggested that in my report because it is a steep area that goes down towards the lower basement area of the existing building. And the less traffic in and out of there, I think, from a traffic maneuverability and a safety standpoint, especially in the wintertime where there's icing and cars sliding down that steep slope, I think that would be a better arrangement for that.
We agree, yes, absolutely.
With regards to the aisle width, I agree that in the front parking towards 517, that is existing and the applicant's not changing that. That is what it is. What I did do on my plan, on the aisle width between the existing building and the building on the next lot just to the south, I did sketch on, because I noticed it was 90-degree pull-in parking. I did sketch on an area 20 feet out from the building, the whole width, and I don't dispute that you may have measured 20 feet or so with what you measured tonight. But at one point, as you go further to the north, that's where I scaled the approximately 14 feet.
I see.
So that's where I got that number. And again, I think that goes towards minimizing the amount of traffic going in and out towards that rear area, just to avoid excessive traffic in a narrow throat of the access aisle. With regards to the drainage in that area, I don't know, and that's why I asked the question where that grate discharges to. And in fact, since it's down and low, it might be a sump with a dry well. I don't know. That has to be determined. And it's for that reason as well, with the additional impervious area for the parking spaces in the back of that rear area. Granted, it's a limited amount of additional impervious, but if it's coming to a dry well, I don't know what the capacity of that dry well is. And again, I don't think the township has waived that requirement in their resolution, or their ordinance rather, for anything over 500 square feet to provide some mitigation. It may be, for example, and I'm just hypothesizing on this, if in fact that is a dry well, it may be, there has to be a second dry well there in combination with that to handle the additional runoff. The other thing I think is important to, so you folks realize, periodically, there would probably have to be, if it's not on file already, a maintenance plan for that drainage. And I say that because periodically the DEP comes around with the new stormwater reg and audits different municipalities. Sparta is one of the municipalities they did audit.
Yes.
And we'd want to make sure on behalf of the township that we take care of that and address that.
Understood.
Okay,
And Mr. Simmons, there is no recorded maintenance document for it, so we would be happy to do that.
Okay. Then with regards to the lighting plan, I don't doubt the engineer's testimony that he went out there and checked it out tonight. What we would be looking for would be some spot isolux pattern to show that quantified you do have at least a half-a-foot candle in the various areas. And again, if it didn't meet that requirement, show what additional lighting to take care of those darker areas.
We can do that, yes.
With regards to the storm drainage, we talked about that. We had some comments on some details. With regards to the signage, just so it's clear, the only reason I brought up billboard for that freestanding sign wasn't because of the size. It was because it was labeled a billboard. And when we think of billboard, it's to advertise some off-site business. And we just wanted to make sure there was no confusion that they could advertise somebody separate that's not on this lot on that freestanding sign.
Okay,
That's where that came from.
we'll correct that.
Okay? And I believe the other items, Mr. Chairman, will be addressed when the next witness comes up for the architecture.
Okay. Mr. Mark?
Thank you. Just following up on Mr. Simmons' comment about the lighting, there is a section under the design standards for parking that notes the lighting standard. Because it's not shown on the plan, I don't know if that's something that a waiver would need to be sought. Dave?
I would prefer, if the board's going to act favorably on the application, to have a condition that the lighting study be done in the field, actually to go out there with a light meter and quantify spot by spot what the lighting intensity is, and that way we can have a record of it, plus we can identify any areas that might have to be augmented with additional lighting.
And if it doesn't meet the average, then, and it does need additional lighting in the form of maybe a pole, would that require amended site plan?
If the board wants to see it back, or if the board is comfortable providing the additional lighting subject to the review by our office or the building inspector.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's thought through, because it's not shown on the plans right now.
And we have no objection to doing that. I mean, I think having it recorded in some ways is a good idea.
Yeah. There's another design standard which requires, under 18-5.3, point H, item N, requires the parking to have at least 5 feet separation from a building. So I believe that those parking spaces that are parallel along the building will probably require a design waiver, which was not indicated on the plans, but you have a planner here, I believe, so they're going to provide testimony. And it should include some proofs for the relief for a design waiver request. And I think that's, oh, there's 2 other things. One which hasn't been discussed yet. I believe there was a comment from someone in the public at the last meeting who had discussed the kind of any consideration for pedestrian connection between the sidewalk on Sparta Ave to the building, because right now it doesn't make sense to have a sidewalk that leads to this if it's unsafe. So I didn't know if any consideration was given to that comment about creating maybe a hatched or striped kind of pedestrian walkway connection to the building, and if that could be provided.
We can provide a crosshatch area that would basically designate, hopefully, an area where pedestrians can use to access the property and get to the building.
Okay. And then finally, I know it was discussed at the last meeting. I don't recall what was agreed to or what was finally discussed, but I didn't see an updated plan for landscaping. Will the applicant agree to update and improve the landscaping at the frontage of the site?
Yes, I'll speak on his behalf. He can also address that, but yes, we did talk about it last time after the meeting, and he is definitely for updating the landscape.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Justin, why don't we start at your end this time?
Yeah, I'm excited to see the business come in. I think my concerns are on the parking. I am going to defer to our parking experts here, but I was intrigued by what Mr. Simmons was saying about limiting the business for certain aspects to limit the parking. I'm not sure how that would work. I'd like to maybe see what kind of plan, like how that works. I'm not sure if we're going to see those details in a subsequent meeting.
Our architect has, when Mr. Simmons issues a report, she will have a floor plan that will show you the reduced number of seats and things like that, which will, that's what we base this parking calculation on. So you'll have that.
That's a situation where business is good, or if you've got peak hours where you know there's a lot of business, that's when you would kind of limit.
Yeah,
Base.
and the other thing too is with, the cross easement, as I said, will act, for the parking, will help provide kind of a relief valve. And you'll also hear from our planner, every time I've been by the pharmacy, by 6 o'clock, it starts to get quiet there. They're open till 8 during the week, but that also will free up some additional parking because, the pharmacy's peak hours would not be, at 7:30 on a Friday night. So our planner will go into that and kind of give you the comfort level that on this property, in combination with the property next door, we should have more than enough parking based on how these restaurants will be set up.
Okay.
Now, if you'd like, I mean, I can just touch base very quickly on this plan, which is the plan of the building, the plan view of the building. And this is a totally different sheet. It's A-100.
Then this was part of the submission.
This will,
Yes.
exactly, this was part of the submission. So on this sheet, basically, in the upper right-hand corner, it gives you a complete breakdown of the parking, the restaurant sizes, and the parking needs. In addition to that, the actual image on the left side of the sheet that depicts the areas where the restaurants are proposed, which what we talked about, it's the, sheet-wise would be the north part of the sheet and the east part of the sheet of the building footprint, basically. And if I can touch on the parking requirements, again, top, my apology, my back is to you, but top right-hand corner, it gives you the pharmacy area, the total area of approximately 1678 square feet, and then 1 per 200 gives you approximately 8.39 spots required. We're proposing 9. Restaurant 01, total area is 1,400 square feet, and Restaurant 1 is the top restaurant on the footprint as shown. And basically, we use the 2 requirements as proposed or as suggested by the township based on the area. The kitchen area is 700 square feet, the eating area is 700 square feet, and if we do it 1 per 50 square feet of eating area, basically we come in to 700 divided by 50 is 14 spots. But if we use it on a per seat basis, we have potentially 16 divided by 3 is 5.33 spots. So we're using the 14 as the guidance of how many spots we need for Restaurant 1. Restaurant 2 is the total area is 1,100 square feet. Again, on the footprint, it would be the bottom right-hand side corner. And the same breakdown, basically based on the square footage of 450 for the eating area. It requires 9 spaces, and based on seats, it requires basically 3 spots. So we're using the 9. So we added 9 plus 14 plus 9, and we arrived at 32 spaces. That's the breakdown. So we do have as shown in here, a breakdown of where the kitchen area is and where the seating area that's basically affiliated with each one of those restaurants.
What was the date of the revision on those plans?
Those were the 15.
The 15th also? Okay, thank you.
That was my biggest point for me, but I'll pass it on and see if there's any other questions on that. And then we can come back.
Again, on parking. Did you do any counts as far as the present use, with just the pharmacy there? What their peak hours? Generally, it's lunchtime and dinner time is their peaks, because that's when people have a break to go running in there. But did you do any counts?
We didn't do any counts. The owner, well, the owner's representative can elaborate on that since,
Okay.
yeah, he's there.
All right. And
But we don't disagree with your general notion that that's probably,
Yeah.
because the other thing too, what's happened is pharmacies, not just with this one, but a lot of them now, deliver and things like that. So the idea of, having to go and wait for your prescription has, kind of become passé.
All right. The other comment I had, I know the police department commented on this, their traffic division, and they did say when there were prior tenants in these 2 spaces, I think one was a barber, one was a health food store, I believe, there were parking issues on the spot, that were there. So I just want to hear a little bit more on, what you're doing to expand what you're doing. Thank you.
So do you want to address that, Ernie's point now, or do you?
Which,
Looking to hear a little bit more, what your response, maybe Colonel Morris's police report, his memo?
So the police officer issued, and he talked about that. I think what we've done to try to address that again is you're going to hear from the owner by offering up a cross easement that should provide, adequate a relief valve for this parking, so it's not going to be an issue. And since he controls it, if we record an easement, not only, the nice thing about that is it runs with the two lots, and if the owner was ever to sell one of the two, they would still be subject to that easement. So we don't take issue with what Officer Morris had said, and that's what we're trying to do as a solution to it.
Okay. Ready? Okay. Deputy Mayor Blumetti?
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. A few questions to start with, just to clarify too, so everyone I think understands. The opening, the entrances to the restaurants, the south corner, that restaurant, the entrance is facing 181, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And however, the north corner restaurant, the entrance is facing the thin single-lane parking spaces that people have to back out of. Is that correct, in that top corner?
So yes, the second restaurant, it would be, the doors are shown in here, in that purple depiction for the restaurant or for the building itself. So they are facing the handicap parking, facing 517.
Okay. Do you have an estimated volume of customers per hour or vehicles per hour for both spots?
It's difficult to actually have an estimated number, given that we're not necessarily sure of the type of restaurant that would be coming into those spaces. They're rather pretty small restaurants. I've indicated they're approximately 700 square feet and 400 square feet of eating area, so that's a pretty small area. The client is relying on more people coming in, ordering, picking up, and then going home, rather than somebody coming in and occupying a space for the next 2 hours to sit down and have dinner. We are providing seating. We are providing a couple of tables in each restaurant, so if somebody needs to sit down and eat, they can. But like I said, they're pretty small-size restaurants.
From what I understand of the parking calculations thus far, you're indicating that the building needs 32 parking spaces that are required at this point with the reduced seating footprint. That's correct?
Well, with the proposed seating.
Proposed seating footprint
Yes.
is to be 32.
Correct.
And in order to get to the 32, just to make sure I'm following, you're creating 6 new parking spaces in the back section against the undeveloped lot, correct?
Currently, this area is being used as parking, mostly by employees. So we're just organizing that parking area. So what we did is we showed 3 parking spaces adjacent to the building, 1 in the rear facing 517, and 6 facing the undeveloped property in the back.
But the 6 are new. The 6 will be new.
Again, it's a stone covered area, so people do park there. Now, do they park, the way that we have it shown? I don't believe so. I think they just come in and pull their vehicle into that space or into that spot. But they're currently being used by vehicles or, people that work in or come into this building.
Okay. My understanding is that the impervious surface, the maximum allowed for this lot is 40%, and the current existing conditions are 71.7, it's almost 72% impervious. What is the new number? So that's what we need to know. So you're adding 6 spaces, paving them, earlier you made an argument that perhaps it's 3, not 6. What is the new impervious surface number that you'd be asking for an additional variance on?
So what I indicated before is that the footprint of the 6 spaces that in here that we've delineated, spaces 27 through 32, partially that space or partial part of those spaces are already paved. So they're already taken into account. Another large portion of it is a stone area, which is already, again, taken into account. And depending on how you look at it, if the area is being used by vehicles on a regular basis, it's technically almost impervious. Yes, it may
Well,
not-
stone usually is pervious, correct?
No, not necessarily.
Gravel, stone.
By DEP's definition, it's not.
Okay.
It's impervious. But everyone looks at it differently.
Yeah.
Again, if it's stone left in the middle of the woods, it's impervious. But if it's stone in an area where it's being compacted on a regular basis, then generally speaking, it does become an impervious surface. So the remaining part of these proposed spaces in here is basically, I can mark it up on this plan, on this exhibit, is basically a line and I can give you an approximate dimension for it. So it's approximately 27 feet by 15 feet. I used to know it off the top of my head, but I don't.
405.
It's about 400 square feet.
So that's suggesting that it's less than 3 spaces, right? Those 3 parking spaces at 180 square feet would be 540. So you're suggesting it's actually less than 3?
I'm not suggesting, that's the real situation out there. That's what we have currently, an area that although is a disturbed area, completely disturbed area, but we will be turning that area into impervious. So that additional area is about 400 square feet, 405 if you do the numbers correctly.
That's your testimony, that the change from pervious to impervious will be 405
Correct,
square feet?
yes.
And I think on the plan, Mr. Nader, I think it was, what, 71.7% is the new?
That was the old, I believe.
71.7%.
7, I'm sorry, 7.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what
And
is
that
the,
would take into account the extra, I guess, 400 square feet?
That should take into account the extra 400 square feet.
okay, can you repeat that again? So the current existing was 71.7. What is the proposed?
That should include that proposed section in here, 71.7.
That's the new
We're
one.
happy to look at it,
Okay.
just to confirm, but yes, it
Okay.
should include that additional space. I mean,
What-
that additional area.
So what is the,
7.7.
can you give me the 2 numbers? What it is currently today and what the proposal is?
I don't have the actual square footage of the entire area, at least shown on this plan. don't
I just
have
meant the percentage-wise of impervious. Yeah.
I think the old plan may have had it before you put those spaces back there.
It's on Catherine's report, I think.
It was originally was 71.7.
Okay.
Was
Yeah.
what was
That's the
proposed
existing.
originally.
And that's without those spaces
That's
being
without the
taken.
extra
Without those
spaces.
spaces.
Right.
Okay.
Now, part of those proposed spaces, there was some impervious surface there. We just pushed it out a little bit, so,
What would it be now?
That's a 400.
73.7.
I'm being given a number of 73.3. Oops, sorry. Given a number of 73.3. I'll double check it.
Okay.
Confirm, 73.3.
Okay. Okay, only observation for now, that is a concern. That's all the questions I have for now, but I might come back to this later. Thank you.
Okay. I have, I guess, quite a few concerns. I stopped by there today, maybe around 3:30. There were 16 cars in the rear. They were double parked along the side, so you have the 6 spots, and every single one was double parked, and then there were 5 going along the side and down to the dumpsters. If they're for employees, those 16 employees would be for the pharmacy at this point, and there'd be no room for more employees for the 2 restaurants, because every single spot was taken, unless other people are parking there from somewhere else. I don't know, but there were 16 cars there. Part of the other concern is the ones that are going down the slope toward the dumpster. That is a very steep slope that, as somebody mentioned earlier, if it rains, it gets icy. And is that really safe for employees? And is that the best spot to put parking spaces? You know, has anything been taken into consideration about the safety issues? And another question I have, the three on the side of the building, are they approved spots at this point?
Approved, you mean as the, a prior site plan approval?
Yes. By the board, town?
I don't have the prior site plan. It was a number of years ago, so I don't necessarily have that in our possession to be able to confirm it. When you purchased it, they were?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, so when
I know they've been used,
client-
you know, but
when the client purchased the property, those areas were delineated for parking at that time.
okay. So the ones you're going to put in the back, the 6 spaces, they're double parked now, and they're going to continue to be double parked.
So when we say in the back, the spaces 23 through 25?
No, the double park is 27 through 32.
Yeah, that's why we're trying to organize this area, so they're not going to be double parked. So
Then
I
where
don't know
will they
really who
go?
parks, why 16 cars are in the back. I did notice tonight, there were quite a few cars,
Yeah.
to be honest, and I was gonna ask the client, who is parking? Because practically, there's nobody coming into the pharmacy. So I'm not sure why so many vehicles are parked in this area, but nevertheless, certainly would be able to post sign that says parking for patrons only, for, you know, clients only, for whatever the case may be. Anyone will be subject to towing. So we will control that via signage in here, and I'm sure the client will be happy to even install cameras if need be to identify if someone.
Imagine like why anybody would even want to be parking back there.
Yeah,
But, you know, if they are part of the employees, I don't know what the operation is like, where would those go if they're not being double
I
parked?
don't believe we have 16 employees in the pharmacy. The square footage of this pharmacy won't be able to accommodate 16 people working there. But
I don't know, I just thought it was strange.
yeah, I agree. It is. By organizing the parking and delineating the parking, it's going to make life a whole lot easier. Whenever there is no organization, people do tend to park wherever they feel like parking. But adding lines in here and posting signs will basically enforce that and push people to park appropriately.
Okay, now, at the end of spot 32,
Yes.
to the edge of the property, how much room is there? I can't see anything from here.
It's practically on the property line.
Okay, so
The
now,
line is on the property line.
if that's the case, you're blocking the access road that would go to the undeveloped properties in the back. We have no idea what they will be, but this is an access road to them. And you have to be able to either put in a delivery truck or a moving van or whatever the case may be. So can you put new spaces in an access road?
So we're not, we're actually inside our property. Although we're on the line, but the parking is inside the property. It does not encroach into the easement as proposed. There is a rather a small retaining wall at the end adjacent to, not identified in here, but parking, call it number 26 on the plan. There's approximately about 3 feet between the limit as delineated and the wall. If we need to push that parking to give it another foot or so from that easement, I think it wouldn't be a problem. Taking all of these lines as shown in here and just pushing them down into our property an extra foot. So you have that additional foot to get to the property.
Tighter. So from the end of spot 32, how much room is there for the easement?
Like I said, the line, the division line between the end of the parking and the easement is right along the property line. So the vehicle will be parked on our property. It's not going to be parking on the easement or in the easement.
But how wide is that easement at that end?
It's the existing width. We're not changing the width of it.
What, but I can't see. I'm asking you what the width
I
is.
think it's 40.
I believe it's 40 feet.
40 feet?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're not encroaching into that 40 feet.
When you talk about the cross easements with the chiropractor, there are 4 spots in the front and 2 handicap. There are 3 along the side. There were cars in all of them today. In the rear, they were empty, but it was the middle of the day, and those are residents back there, and there's a child's little house and playground. So that parking, I would believe, would be for the residents back there, and if you have people overflowing and going in and out, that would raise a concern too with children. And can you tell me how many spots are required for that other building? And how many extra spots are there?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to refer to the beauty of electronics these days. So I'm looking at an aerial image of the adjacent property, and what we currently have is exactly what you stated. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parking spaces in the front. One of them is a designated handicap space.
2 are handicap. They share,
Oh, yes, that's correct. 2 are handicap, yep.
yeah, they share that act,
They
you know,
do share
getting out
that,
of the
that
van
middle
type of
crosshatch
thing.
area. Then on the side, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 head-on parking to the building. And in the rear, and there's a shadow that is cast over, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there are 6 spaces that face the rear property, the undeveloped property, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 spaces that face the back of the building. So there's 6 spaces. There are 6 spaces back in here. If I'm marking the exhibit A1, there are 6 spaces here. There are 5 spaces in the front, and there are 5 spaces on the side. So 12 plus 10 are 22 spaces. The single bedroom requires 1.8 spaces per RSIS, so that's 3.6. Generally, that's 4 spaces. You always go to the next higher number. So that's 4 spaces for the apartments. And with regard to the chiropractor, again, it's based on square footage. I'm not sure yet what the square footage of that building is, what the footprint of that building. 775?
They're 1-bedroom apartments? I thought you said before there were 2.
There are 2 units, each one of them is 1 bedroom.
All right.
So it's about another 4 spaces. So in total, you need 8 spaces, and as I said, we have 22 spaces. So technically, we have 14 additional spaces that should be vacant, empty at all times, that can be used as an overflow from our application.
It does just concern me with the children's playground equipment back there.
Understood, yes.
You also said that you don't know the volume for the restaurants or anything, but then how do you have a business plan? Because any good business plan would start with a calculation of anticipated volume.
You'll hear from the owner on that.
Okay. All right, just back to the parking one more time, or to the congestion. Going back to Corporal Morris's letter, you did address the parking part, but the last statement that he makes is that it exits onto Sparta Avenue, which is already heavily congested state highway. Adding more vehicles will only add to the already congested state roadway, which will increase the possibility of traffic incident and crash. So that part of his letter has not been addressed.
And not to take anything away from his anecdotal observation, the building's already there, the dimension's already there. I mean, no matter what you do here is gonna increase the traffic. I mean, there's nothing to suggest that we're introducing a use, again, the restaurant use is allowed, that is going to so exacerbate the traffic that it's going to take this level of service that may be a C and drop it down to an F. If you took his view literally, then nothing should ever go on in this property again. Because no matter what you do, I mean, you have 2,500 square feet of vacant space. The way he's described it, if you return to the vitamin store and the hair salon, you're going to add traffic, and that traffic's going to go on Main Street, and that traffic could potentially increase the likelihood of accidents and congestion. We don't disagree with that, but I don't know what you do about it besides not developing this property or allowing it to ever be used.
Well, restaurants would require more parking than a hair salon.
Well, but also, too, restaurants are generally on off-peak hours. I mean, if a successful restaurant is, 6 to 9 o'clock at night, when that traffic is reduced, it's not during, the morning peak hours, maybe at the tail end of the evening peak hours, but it's also on weekends, which the traffic is also significantly reduced than what you would see on a Wednesday at 5:30 in the afternoon.
Maybe that would take a traffic study.
Yeah.
All right, well, those are some of my concerns. And I guess the slope, you didn't really address that in the rear and should that be the best place for a parking spot, given that slope and the danger that it would pose to employees in the winter?
Again, it is, and I'll let the client address that, but he does maintain it in the winter. I don't believe he's ever had any issue at all from anybody sliding or falling in the rear. So provided that they maintain it on a regular basis and they keep it free of any icing, that is a responsibility that he has to carry.
Okay. And I don't know if the owner's going to come up later, but my one point that bothers me is every single time I have gone past there or in there, the car for the pharmacy, the delivery car, is in the handicap spot.
We'll make sure that they remove it from the handicap spot. Unless it's a person that is handicapped. With the sign, I don't know. We'll check on that and we'll make sure that it is addressed.
Okay.
That is kind of bad that a pharmacy would.
I know, right? Doesn't make any sense.
So for me, again, not to keep harping on the parking, but that is a big concern. Now, I don't know if the overflow is from the apartment units, but not knowing what kind of restaurants are going to occupy those units is an issue, because, we don't know how many spots you're actually going to need. We don't know if those tenants are going to offer breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or just dinner. Not knowing that is an issue, and the whole parking obviously is an issue. That's it for me.
We understand, but then again, we're basing all of our calculations on the zoning and what's required by the township. So, that we took your comments last time to heart, and we made the change necessary to make it work for the proposed use, for the proposed restaurants. So right now, we do meet in, and what we're offering is an overflow across the street, as the client owns both properties, which would address potentially that situation.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to go back to touching on the potential traffic situation. I know a lot of people have focused in on the parking, and it's been explained and re-explained on how that's going to happen. But to Jeanette's point, and us not knowing what the tenants are going to be like, also knowing that restaurants, as you've stated and has been testified, that the intention is for people to come in, pick up their dinner, and leave, which means there's intending to be a lot of turnover and a lot of flow. Whether it's at peak hours or off-peak hours still remains to be seen, because we don't know what the tenant is going to be, who the tenants are going to be. But what we do know is that trying to make a left turn out of that parking lot onto the main road there is hazardous on a good day. So is there any thought to how traffic would flow into and out of that lot and what could potentially be done to mitigate any safety concerns?
I don't have any information as to historically, there's been any accidents in the area or any accident reported for anyone trying to exit the property, making a left turn. Certainly, I'm happy to ask the police department to see if there is any record information on it.
Yeah, I would absolutely appreciate that, because that's, to me, that's one of the larger concerns. I understand that the parking lot size and shape and so on, that there's impervious coverage, also another issue. A lot of other things that are internal to the site that are, but my main concern is, okay, somebody's gone in there to go and grab their dinner, and then, of course, now you've got a crosshatch section for pedestrians potentially walking in. Somebody's trying to come out and really quick, make a turn, and then you've got pedestrians there, you've got turns there, you've got, sight lines that are difficult on a regular, under normal circumstances. So yeah, any thought that can be put into the entry and egress of that space, really, I would appreciate that.
I mean, we can't change it. It's an existing driveway cut as it presently provides access, as it has been since it was approved by this board when the application came before the board, not you guys.
True, but there was also a lot less flow.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know if there was a lot less that was indicated.
I've lived here a long time, yeah, there was a lot less flow.
But again, I mean, the uses being proposed or permitted.
No, I'm not, I'm
and-
just asking if there can be consideration as to how to mitigate that.
But what would you mitigate, though? That's the question. If there's never been any issue or any accident reported,
Well,
what
you
would
just
wanna
said you
mitigate?
don't know if there's an issue because you haven't
Well,
spoken
I mean,
to the police department,
It
so.
would seem to me that you're suggesting like no left-hand turns.
If that's a thought, then that's a thought.
Well, yeah,
I don't
but,
know.
I mean, I don't think there's any other businesses along this stretch of road that would do that. It would also, effectively,
Well, there are no other businesses also that are that close to the intersection, right?
yeah, and
Everyone
look,
is a little bit further down.
when this was designed, 50 years ago, when it was approved, I think if you had a crystal ball, you'd do it differently. But
True.
I think to take that drastic no left turns, and all that would do anyway would force all of the traffic to come out and make a right, and then try to make a U-turn somewhere else along one of the properties on Main Street.
Think about that, right? So if they're making a right, and then they could follow the normal path and make the right into the shop, the Stop and Shop Plaza, and go down the other way if they needed to. I mean, there is a cycle for potentially turning around if they had to.
But the beauty about traffic is that a lot of times when, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I just know enough to get me in trouble. But anyway, the idea behind it is that you couldn't ask for an ideal location because it is controlled by the traffic signal, which is immediately adjacent to us. So when the traffic signal turns red, this is the ideal time to make your left turn or right turn because all the vehicles coming or going are stopping. And it allows you for breaks between the vehicles to be able to see to make that left. And that's probably what was reviewed at that point in time when this was approved 50 years ago and said, yes, we don't have an issue with you having an exit and making a left turn onto 181. This is our basically, only way into the property. We call the money maker into the property. Having someone going around in circles, right turn and a right turn and a right turn to come back, they might do it once, but they're never going to come back again. So we
Well,
can't
that's not even
restrict-
so much into, it's out of, I
Yeah,
think.
that's what I mean.
is-
Out of, you forcing them to make a right on a driveway that's existed forever, making a right on a left.
Well, because into, there's a secondary lane, because there's a secondary lane that goes into the entrance of the Ocean State job lot. So there's pass-by traffic to make the left into. It would be more about making the left out of, trying to cross over 2 lanes in order to be able to make that left.
Courtesy goes a long way. I own a property I own a property in Hackettstown that has the same exact situation right at a traffic signal. And I have to cross 2 lanes to make a left. And I've been there for 10 years, and we've never had any issue because in addition to visually looking at the red traffic signal to make a left, people do stop for you and you make a left. And I've never had any issue at all trying to exit the property. Now, again, it's difficult to belabor the subject, at least from my point of view, whether it's best to do a right turn, going up to the light, going down the street, making a right to come back, or not. I understand where you're coming from.
Okay. No, I just wanted to make that point, that I truly believe that that's a safety issue.
It's also 2 lanes, you're rolling out
Right, that's what I'm saying, there's pass by, you can pass by going in, you just can't coming out.
No, you're saying that there's more space to make a left out?
I have no further questions.
I've got a couple I just want to run through.
Right,
Some of them have been
right.
answered already, so I'll try to keep them short, the ones that haven't been. So in terms of the easement, I'm still unclear what that easement is. So if there's the easement that allows both properties to use that, would that allow the people from the physical therapy building to use the parking spaces that run alongside, like 20 through 22? Or how do you restrict that? Or do we need to look at both sites together if we're going to look at that easement?
It won't be cross easement between the two. It'll only be one-way easement between this property and this property.
Okay.
The current property under consideration and the property south of it.
So
that would be
they would not, the other building would not be able to use those parking spaces?
correct.
Okay. And the easement would be irrevocable? So
Yes.
if one lot got sold, the other, okay,
Would be subject to that.
okay. So on-site circulation, I'm still concerned with the aisle widths. You know, does the widths as shown on your drawing there, do they conform to the standards? And I didn't see any measurements, or I don't see any requests for any waivers or anything, but for instance, if I look at parking spaces 27 and 28, and then I look at the loading space, you know, is there enough of a circulation to conform to the standard of aisle width?
What I provided through prior testimony is that space, the loading space, will be restricted certain times of the day that we would not be occupying those spaces. Again, I'll let the owner testify to that, but our intention is to basically only utilize that loading space when there are no vehicles parked in those spaces, 23 through 25, or 26, or all the way up to 32.
I hear that. I'm still concerned, you know, what happens if someone goes back to unload and then those parking spaces are full? How does that truck then turn around? There's got to be a width to allow maneuverability and circulation.
I do agree. Yes, that is correct. I mean, the only way that would do it is to back up in an easterly form up the driveway, come back to the edge of the existing paved area, and then move forward toward the exit. That would be the only way to do it. If the truck that's coming in, which we don't anticipate, I think last time we provided testimonies that deliveries are only in the form of vans, especially for the food items. They're not looking at big trucks that are going to come in to deliver food or deliver supplies.
Okay. So if I look at that, so even if I look at the remaining spaces, I'm not sure, because I don't see on the drawing anywhere, what is the aisle spacing between, say, 31, 32, and 26, or 24 and 23? You know, and does it conform to the standard?
It does, yeah. Actually,
And
I can tell you that it's approximately 30 feet from the end of parking space 32 to the beginning of parking space 23. So it's ample
Okay.
space in between.
And do you know what the standard is there? I could look it up. Do you know what it is?
24 feet generally is what you strive to have.
Okay. And then if I come down the easement and I look at spaces 20 through 22, I think it was mentioned before that there are head-on parking spaces along the, was it lot 57 there, which would be the physical therapy building. So if I was to look at the aisle space between these parking spaces and those parking spaces, what is it, and does it conform to the standard?
We have two dimensions. My dimension based on my measurement tonight, and the dimension of the engineer based on his site visit, and they vary from 20 feet to 14 feet. I did not measure that area, which is the tightest area, basically to the northern part of Lot 52 building, across from space 22. I did not measure that area in the field tonight to see, because I wanted to see a real vehicle parked in that area, see how much space we have left between.
So do we know if it conforms, or we don't know if it conforms?
So it doesn't conform. If it is 14 feet, it does not.
So that would require a waiver?
That would require a waiver, yes.
Okay, so a little concerned. I'd like to get more clarity in terms of what waivers are required and where they're. Let me see what else I got here. So parking space quantity, so I get a little confused here, so help me out. So when I look at your drawing, C3, I think for the restaurants, you felt that the restaurants required a total of 23 spaces, which was, I think, 14 spaces for Restaurant 1 and 9 for Restaurant 2. So when I look at Mr. Simmons' report, Mr. Simmons, I thought you felt that there was 33 required for both restaurants, or did I misread that?
Those are based on the scale dimensions that I had as far as the area goes. Now, my understanding is with what they're proposing tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're proposing to restrict the area that's going to be used for a restaurant, which would decrease the number of parking spaces required.
So when you say restrict the area in terms of the area that's used to, the service area that's used to calculate the parking?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're saying then is that for Restaurant 1, the eating area would be restricted to 700 square feet? And for Restaurant 2, the eating area would be restricted to 450 square feet?
I believe 400, if I'm correct. Oh, 450, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Will either of these restaurants be offering delivery? And if so, where will the cars, or would they be stored on site? Where will they be? Okay. And we talked about the sign and talked about the impervious coverage. Yeah, so I have concerns with the on-site circulation. Looking to get some further clarity there, as well as the, I guess, are there any waivers required that we're not seeing? I guess a complete list of all the waivers that would be needed before I could go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask another one or two follow-up questions, just based on some of this discussion? First, talking about easements, the building to the south, does that building currently have any existing easements in place, say, for instance, with the building to its south? Or any other easements?
There's no easement.
Okay. And the other question is, I've kind of heard two areas tonight of being proposed for employee parking. First, it was near the loading space area, so that there's more control over the loading space in case you needed employees to perhaps move. And then I think I also heard, no, it's going to be in the back against the northeast property line, the new spaces that you would put up there in line. Is it, which one is it?
I think you're going to both, correct?
Yeah,
Is it
that is
both?
correct. So we're proposing, basically, what we're saying is spots 23, 25, 26 would be designated for employees, and this, again, can be designated for employees, spots 26 through 32. So the
Okay.
area entirely in the back can be designated for employees.
Okay, so that's what you're proposing is both?
Correct.
Okay. All right, that's all I have for now, thanks.
No problem.
Okay.
I have a quick question for Catherine. when we're talking about parking, the parking for employees is included in those numbers, those required numbers, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Just wanted to clarify.
Okay, why don't we go to the public? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, if we go to the public, if there are any questions on the testimony that you just heard?
You know, I had to ask questions.
Please
And-
raise
and-
your right
and
hand.
At this stage, if we can, like to keep it to just
I'll be quick, I
questions to the
promise.
applicant, and
Yeah.
then comments we can save in the
It'll be
final wrap-up.
quick.
Thank you.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Please state your name and address.
Beth Broderick, North Shore, in Sparta. Just a quick question based on all of your parking designs.
Beth, can you talk into the microphone?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Thank you.
Can you get a fire truck in there with the proposed parking?
The only parking that's proposed is in the rear of the building, not in the front. That's his existing parking in the front. All the way around, 3 sides of the building are all existing and delineated parking. The back is basically I call it chaotic parking. People just park in that area. So we're trying to organize it so it does allow for a fire truck to come in. As I stated, just answer, as I stated, it's 30 feet wide between the parking spaces. So yes, you
We also
can.
heard 14 feet, so I'm just curious, like,
May I
I'm.
finish, if you don't mind? So the idea is that there is plenty of room in the back to allow for a vehicle of that size to be parked in the aisle between the 2 parking.
Okay, so it wouldn't necessarily be where, I think we heard 14 feet, so wouldn't, that, the 14-foot space wouldn't be an issue?
It wouldn't be an issue, no.
Okay, then-
You can get a vehicle of that size through a 14-foot space. Actually, lanes on the road are approximately 12 feet, and you get all sorts of vehicles that travel within those lanes.
Well, I was just thinking with fire trucks, you're looking at hoses and stuff like that, and people getting in and out, and a lot of activity around the truck, so they'd need more than the standard travel lane for a vehicle. But my other question is, since there are residences next door, and there is at least 1 child there, have you accounted for the possibility of a school bus stopping there and residential traffic in and out right next door?
Well, it is currently residential. It is currently being used. It is currently being used by folks that own vehicles and exit and enter the
But
property on
I'm
a
more
regular
concerned about a
basis.
school bus and a young child.
I don't believe there is a sign for school bus in that location. I'm not sure. Is there one?
There is, the school bus stops by the highway, and
Sir, you can't talk right now until you're sworn and called as a witness. So
Okay.
anything he said will be ignored and stricken from the record.
Okay, he will provide that testimony.
The other questions I have are more for in and out traffic because we have a Burger King with a drive-through. We have a proposed 40-unit residential building going back in that area as well, so that's going to change the traffic pattern. You have a right-hand turn lane coming from between Odd Lot and 7-Eleven coming down. You mentioned when the light turns red that people would be courteous, or there's such a thing as courtesy. But when you have traffic that does not come to a complete stop at that red light, and then you have traffic coming out of Odd Lot where people are taking advantage of the break in traffic. And I used to work on that corner at 70 Sparta Avenue, so I know what the traffic pattern is. It's a stinking nightmare. So I'm concerned, like these guys are, with the circulation of traffic in and out. When you have a hot mess of an intersection where the traffic doesn't really stop, and you're saying, well, people are going to be courteous, I would just ask if you put thought into the actual 2 lanes of traffic coming and going and people going off.
As I stated before, this is an existing driveway with an existing use and an existing operation. And people come into that property and exit the property on a daily basis, and they make a left as they make a right. And
I'm going to challenge you a little bit because I've lived here longer than that building. I've lived here almost 50 years. Okay, I'm here longer than the 517 bypass. I'm here before that building was built and when it was Littell's Appliance, and it did not have the traffic that's there now. It did not have the volume. That light was not 2 lanes of traffic coming from Pope John and Newton, or 2 lanes going through the intersection up the hill right by your location. So I'm just asking if you looked into or considered that fact with the traffic patterns, because if you've got all of that going on and people driving into telephone poles at that intersection already. I really have concerns like these guys do about the traffic, especially with the residential area and people that are whizzing through there and another residential building going in there.
I don't know much about the residential building going in, but thank you for the information.
I think that that should be something considered maybe with you guys. And also, last question with parking, because you're putting in a higher volume business or two higher volume businesses than a hair salon that moved, or I don't even know if they're working, and then the nutrition store that went out, are you required to increase the number of handicap spots?
We're not required to increase the number of handicap spots. However, though, again, the uses that you've suggested that were there are uses that have a consistent attendance of patrons on a regular basis. Every hour you have appointments, and you have more than one chair for the hair salon, and you have more than just one customer coming into to the other facility on a regular basis. Restaurants have peaks and valleys.
But what I'm asking is for zoning, do you have to change it, is what I'm asking? Because I don't know, I don't do this. And also, is Kurt Morris going to be doing a traffic study for you guys? Corporal, he's the Corporal Morris from the Sparta Police Department.
He offered a report. I don't think he's doing a formal study.
Okay, I can open that, I guess.
I can give you a copy of it right now if you want.
That'd be great. But again, I really think that, maybe you guys can take a look and address the,
If I can, so I think right now it's really questions for the applicant.
Well,
and
yeah,
then-
well,
and
I
then
didn't
we'll
get an
come back
answer on the
with
number
offer
of, Ron, I didn't get the number
comments.
of space, the answer on the number of handicap spaces, and if that has to increase.
Handicap spaces are based upon the ADA requirements.
Okay.
And it's 1 per 25, and then another, when you go over 25, it's another one. And then, so it's based on the total number of parking spaces in a lot, not based on zoning, not based on building size, it's based on the number of parking spaces in a lot.
So total for the building, if the number of spots is going to be increasing, then is it possible that the number of handicap spots would have to?
Well, they have to
We
get
have
over
two.
50 spaces in order for that to increase another one. So right now, I think there's 2 handicap spaces, correct? Because there are 30, whatever spaces. I think there's 32 spaces on the site. So they're under the 50. They're over 25, so under 25, it's 1 space. Over 25, it's 2 spaces. But until you go over 50, you're not hitting more than that.
Okay, so depending on how the parking works out and overflow and next door and stuff like that, that could change it.
It's related to the site itself. So even if they have a shared parking access agreement with the other site, that doesn't impact handicap because it's per parking lot.
Okay. All right, I'll talk to Kurt. I can get the other reports that I'm looking for.
Please raise your right hand. Were you sworn at the prior hearing? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and address and spell your last name.
Jennifer Derricks, Dericks, Tap into Sparta. I just have a couple of questions on our favorite topic, parking. There are a number of issues that are based on assumptions. The food delivery is only going to be done by a van. It's going to be mostly pickup, and that the peak hours of the businesses that are going into these 2 spaces are going to be primarily, their peak hours will be not impacting the peak hours of the pharmacy. So these are all assumptions that we don't really know because we don't know who the restaurant, what kind of restaurants or which restaurants are going to be there. Are these things that can be codified into the resolution, that food delivery will only be made by vans, that the primary business model of these restaurants will be mostly or some percentage of pickup? If we're making an assumption on how the circulation is working, the ingress and egress, the safety of the parking lot, I was going to bring up the issue that Fluss Holdings is looming with potentially 80 cars whose circulation plan also takes it through the back of those buildings that exist now, adding to circulation concerns. Can these unknowns be codified into the resolution? Will the resolution be subject to the businesses, once they're known, coming back for an application to make sure that they meet these assumptions? That's my question.
Was that, to-
Collins.
Okay.
No, I don't answer questions for witnesses, so, yeah.
Right. So that- that-
The engineer can answer if he has an answer.
right.
I'm not sure what, it's a legal question. I mean, the board can impose whatever conditions it feels appropriate and that Mr. Collins recommends.
You're making assumptions, you're giving testimony.
But the assumptions, you can't limit it, I'm not really sure what you mean. Like, you can't say it can only be an Italian restaurant, it can only be a
No.
pizzeria. I mean.
Well, one of the questions was, one of the concerns of the board members was the large trucks coming in to make deliveries to the restaurants. And the answer to that was, it's not a concern because it will be delivery by
A condition like
vans.
that, we could agree to.
So
I mean, you're
that's
not
what
gonna
I'm-
get a tractor
bless
trailer
you.
in there. Yeah.
Okay, and then that it's going to be mostly pickup, but you don't know that because you don't know who the tenants
Mostly
are.
pickup.
The business
food?
model of the restaurants, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna say it's, because I don't even know how you quantify mostly pickup. Is it
I
over
understand, that's the-
50%? But there'll be a portion of it that'll be pickup, yes.
I'm just saying, because that's the testimony that's being
Yeah.
given in answer to the concerns of the board
Yes.
members. And so how does that get handled in terms of a resolution in an approval? Should that be given? That's my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, so seeing none, I'm just doing a time check.
Can I just ask one more from the, or is my time up? The cross easement that you're discussing with the building next door for overflow, is it for a certain number of spots? Because if that business changes where they require more spots, or is it just?
I have to come back to you.
I mean, I don't think you would, I mean, it's up to you. I mean, you could limit it to a certain area on the property. I mean, look, the reality of it is if there's no parking on the one thing, if somebody wants to go there, whether it's to the pharmacy or the restaurants, they'll probably park there as a practical matter anyway. And quite frankly, I don't think if you want to see this stretch of businesses succeed, because they're all connected, Burger King, I mean, they kind of all flow together. You know, do you want to be so vigilant and say, and say to somebody, hey, you're going to the Burger King, but you're parked over here, that's not right. I mean, we'll give you the cross easement. I mean, if you wanted to say 10 spaces and we could delineate, I mean, but I think if the goal here is to try to see businesses thrive and continue, I don't know if you want to be that restrictive. I think a general cross easement would be sufficient enough where at least if somebody's going to park over there and run over to pick up a prescription or pick up a sandwich, they don't have to worry about necessarily being accused of trespassing.
But if a new business comes in there and it has a certain number of required spaces and there is an easement, it's going to have an impact.
It would, I mean, each property would stand alone. You're right. I mean, if there was such a business that came in that captured all of them, but I think, how many spaces did we have there?
On our property or next door?
Next door.
I believe 22 spaces.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if you'd have a business in there, at least based on the size of the building, and you have the 2 apartments up, that would require more than 22 spaces. I guess maybe if another restaurant came in.
Exactly.
Yeah, you could.
That's what I'm thinking.
But again, if another restaurant came, that would probably be an indication that, that may be the businesses that are ultimately going to be something that's appropriate there. I mean, I do a lot of this work. I mean, Hackettstown was kind of a deteriorating town. What saved it is there's restaurants all over the place. And I'm not saying it's Morristown, but I mean, I think ultimately you as a community, I mean, if there's a business model that's going to work, I don't know if you want to necessarily, I'm not saying, look, you give it carte blanche to park on the street, but I don't know if you want to necessarily say, well, if we're going to have this cross easement, you're only allowed to have 5 spaces. If that's what you want, we'll certainly do that. I mean, we're not trying to be confrontational. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. We were going to leave it open and have it available to, to almost not limit it in any way. Now, you're right, would that, if a chiropractor goes out and, an Applebee's wants to come in, that may pose some problems. But right now, I think we've got, based on the square footage of that building, we have enough room to do, to offer it up just as a general cross parking access easement.
Thank you.
Okay, so the way we operate is we go till 9:30 with testimony, and then we have to leave the last half hour of the meeting for the other business that needs to be required.
I got 2 minutes.
That?
I got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean-
We'll talk no, I'm kidding. So,
And I think you've got some other people that you want to provide
we got
testimony.
3 more,
Three
yeah.
more, yeah. So would you be willing to move this, pick up at another date?
I mean, look, we're not going to finish tonight, even
Right.
if you gave us some more time. So for continuity's sake, what do you have?
Dory, I think what do you,
October 16th and then November 6th.
You here on the 16th? Especially because you don't have a car. John, you around on the 16th? Okay. Yeah, that would be, you're good? Okay. The 16th would work.
great, and we'll get you up first on.
That's
fine. Okay.
All right, so we'll carry it to the 16th, no further notice, I guess, Mr. Collins?
We'll carry to October 16th, no further notice, at 7 PM at this meeting room, and will you extend the timeframe?
I will
for
certainly
action?
agree to extend the time.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
everybody.
evening.
All right, what I'd like to do is just take a real quick 5-minute break if we can. We'll come back and we'll finish up and go through the other items. Okay?
Could you
Thank
also submit that to us?
Yeah, if we can get a
Yeah.
copy of that, that would be great. It is chilly.
All right, so this brings us to other board business. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the PDRM2 zone. And, do we want to consider looking at modifying the ordinance in a way that puts a max size on the building size, and also brings in the required impact statements, similar to what we did under ordinance 2221 for both the Economic Development Zone and PDRM 1. So we had some discussion last time, and I think, Catherine, you were going to put some thoughts together, so maybe do you want to kick it off?
Sure. So as mentioned at the last meeting, when we discussed this, the township authorized us to start looking at this zone. As I mentioned, I would basically do an analysis of what had been done by the subcommittee to date on this zone, look at what the changes were that were made to the ED zone and the PDRM1 zone as kind of guidance to looking at the PDRM2, and then look at the PDRM2 zone, give it an analysis to understand and remind ourselves why we didn't change anything back when we did the ED and PDRM1 zones. So what I did was I went through some of the existing conditions of the PDRM2 zone. There are 2 properties in the PDRM2 zone. The tax data provides that Block 16005, Lot 8, which is 606 Houses Corner Road, is approximately 137.4 acres, and 16005, Lot 69, which is West Mountain Road address, is approximately 157.6 acres, for a total of almost 295 acres for the 2 properties in the zone. The PDRM2 zoning ordinance is one that is probably unique to most of the members of this board in the way it's written and what it provides for as a permitted use. And that is what's called, and you'll see it a lot if you read through the zone, what's called a planned development. Planned development is something, and there's citations to the municipal land use law, the MLUL, in that zone that discuss what a planned development is. And what the MLUL allows for is that pretty much for large sites, you can plan things out. So you can basically do like a mini development within a property because it's so big. And there's certain requirements attached to that in the MLUL about providing open space, and other things, whether it be an economic or residential plan development, et cetera. So it's a little bit different in that it's not just permitting a use, but it's permitting, basically you have to come up with a big design of the site and you can include any of those permitted uses. And what it allows for because of that is that there's kind of an overarching tract, so the overall tract, so those 2 properties, each of them are their own tract. They have a tract requirement for that open space. So it's not like each little parcel, if you parceled it out, would have an open space requirement. Rather, the site as a whole, the tax property as a whole, has its own open space set-aside requirement, and then an overarching kind of impervious coverage requirement, which is, again, not something usual you'd see for a very large property anywhere else in Sparta. But that is interesting, but also confusing because that's going to be your guiding principle. So you'll see in that zone that there's an impervious coverage allowance, essentially, or restriction of up to 3% on the total tract. And that would basically be the limitation for every single, if they broke it up into smaller properties, if you broke it up into those smaller properties, 3% would be the guiding for all of those combined. So as you develop them, you chop into that 3%. You basically have to back into how much coverage you get on each little property if you were going to develop them separately as, or in a planned development, plan them out.
Catherine, excuse me, can I ask you to repeat that again? So the 3% is the maximum impervious surface of so in aggregate, the 295 acres, can you do the math on that?
295, yeah, 295.
Yeah, 295. You could say, so the maximum would be 3% of that even, just at a holistic level.
If you're looking at them separately, then it's 3% of each or 3% of the total. It's the same, it's a proportion.
Or 9 acres total.
About, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's say 9 acres. So, that is kind of something you have to, like I said, back into. The requirement is also that there is a 55% set aside or no less than 88 acres, which happens to be a little bit more than 55% on both the sites, of basically contiguous set aside, open space set aside, that won't be developed. And so that's in and of itself, you can't develop that portion of the property. So some of it has to be set aside. So those are,
And that was already set aside with the Golden Dome application for the soil removal on the last lot, so that 88 acres is in dedicated private open space at the end of Houses Corner Road, where it's more woodlands and farm field by West Mountain Road. So that has already been dedicated, that 88 acres, and is deed restricted, enforceable by the Township of Sparta.
and so there's some other requirements about buffer areas from residential zones, buffers off of steep slope areas, et cetera. But then what may be confusing if you're just looking at it first glance, and what I'm trying to explain is that there's then a section about minimum lot area. So that's not to be confused with the overall tract, but the minimum individual lots. So you can call them individual lots, you can call them parcels, whatever. So those minimum individual lots can be no less than 6 acres. So if you're going to portion out either of those tracts, they can be no less than 6 acre sites within that. And then there's a few other bulk standards essentially that are related really to those smaller sites. So within those smaller sites, there can be building heights of 2.5 stories up to 45 feet. And then the coverage gets broken down further. So principal and accessory buildings. So building coverage can be no more than 8% of those individual lot areas, whether it be 6 acres or greater. Parking areas shall not be more than 12% of the lot area, and the total impervious coverage of that 6 or more acre site cannot be more than 15% of the lot area, unless it's a planned development of more than 250 acres, in which there's some larger percentages. It's building coverage of 15%, parking area of no more than 15%, total impervious no more than 25% of the lot area. But what I do want to, it's kind of confusing unless you start to use examples, but those are within the 3%. So those are of the 3%. They're not of the total tract area. They back into that 3% number. And so you can do a little bit of arithmetic and you can work out basically what the total lot area is, what that 3% is, and then basically how many smaller lots could benefit, or they could really create out of it. And the reason why I did those calculations as part of like my own internal analysis to bring back to the board was to figure out what kind of coverages, and I mean, because the tract area doesn't break down building coverage, but what's the overall coverage you can get on either of these sites? And essentially, at the 3%, and I'll talk about some other things, but the 3% maximum for the first tract, the smaller site, lot 8, is about a little under 180,000 total impervious coverage. And for lot 69, the 3% calculation is just over 200. It's about 206,000 for total impervious coverage. So even if you were to develop the site, let's say as one giant lot, and not divide it into those smaller lots that have other things, the total tract coverage could be those 2 allowances. And I did that just because we were floating around ideas about the EDs in the PDR1 zone, which talked about a building max with it's a 25% building coverage, but no greater than 175,000. So I wanted to compare, there's no comparing, I don't like using the phrase apples to apples, but in reality, these 2 zoning ordinances, the ED and PDR1 zone, have much more standard bulk standards that you see, more usual bulk standards you see, in that there's an impervious lot coverage total cumulative of improved lot coverage and building together. There's a separate building coverage standard, whereas this one, there's a controlling factor on the overall tract that's going to limit to the 3%, which is, I think, far, far less than what you see in the ED and the PDR1 zone, which has coverages closer to 40% on those lots. Now those, like I said, those individual lot allowances, if you did not subdivide, but if you did create smaller minimum lot, individual lots, you're not looking at it ever going to 15% of the total lot. It's still 15% of that internal site, and it's still limited by that 3%. So I just want to make that clear. There's one caveat to this, in that the impervious coverage for the tract provisions currently include two separate incentives. One being that the coverage could go up to 5% for the total tract area if that open space dedication is dedicated to the Township of Sparta. Tom, do you know if that Golden Dome, who that was dedicated to?
That was just dedicated to open space as a private restriction, which is authorized by the municipal land use law. But so it's not public land, it's private land, deed restricted to open space, but the deed restriction for open space is enforceable by the Township of Sparta.
Yes, okay. And so the reason why I bring this up is just that it's an incentive that could be taken advantage of, but the township is a participating body that would have to accept that land. So land comes with liability. It can be wet or have environmental encumbrances. It could be contaminated. And so the township, it's not an as of right 5%. It's an incentive if it's a mutually agreed upon. But it is an incentive written into the ordinance. So I just want to make that clear that the 3% is the controlling as of right allowed. The 5% is what's known as like an incentive. So there's something they're getting an incentive on to dedicate the land, but it would have to be accepted. And then there's one additional incentive that's written into the ordinance provision there, and that's if the planned development voluntarily provides for affordable housing to the satisfaction of the board and the township council, then the impervious coverage may be increased to 7%. In looking through this,
Wait, say that, I'm sorry.
up to 7%.
What is up to 7?
The impervious coverage is up to 7%. Now, the interesting thing about that provision and just looking at the zone and comparing it to what's allowed in the zone is even under a planned development scheme, no residential uses are contemplated. So it's a little bit out of place. That was just my first glance.
The whole concept of it is to have this only incentive only if the township council and the board are satisfied that the contribution that's being made
Tom, can you talk into the mic? I'm
off-site,
sorry.
that's contribution that is being made off-site to either the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or to affordable housing, not on-site, is adequate and satisfactory to the township council. So it hasn't been offered, never been offered like that, and that would be something that would be, again, in the total discretion of the township.
Tom, could you give us an example of
That
how
does
that
not
would work?
allow housing on the site. The site is not a housing property, it's an industrial.
So it wouldn't be an inclusionary site.
It would never be an
Inclusionary site's not
inclusionary
permitted
site,
here,
right.
yeah.
In fact, you see that the ordinance is a planned development for, and this one's even more restrictive than the PDRM1 zone in that it's for those listed uses only, and it's not as expansive even as the PDRM1 zone or the ED zone in terms of the listed uses.
Could you give us a hypothetical of how affordable housing would be enabled,
Sure. What
but
happens?
off-site?
There are a variety of ways, but one is that contribution of funds is given to the Township Affordable Housing Trust Fund and is in a significant way that helps the township perhaps, and I'll give you kind of easier examples, grant money to a nonprofit like a group home to build a group home for persons with disabilities and to get credit for those one per bedroom. That is actually a very efficient way to get affordable housing credits with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Another way is to use it as a grant to a nonprofit. Now this A4 has tried to stimulate this even more by allowing nonprofits to receive funds from housing trust funds and to either adapt or rebuild places to make them affordable, perhaps more than a 20% set aside, sometimes even 100% set aside. That's very rare. Sometimes it could be used to underwrite or help the costs of a tax credit developer. A tax credit developer is somebody who uses federal tax credits to subsidize their affordable housing so that they build higher percentages, sometimes 100% in affordable units. And if it ever got to this, if the township decided to do development itself, which I don't recommend because that means you have to commit township funds to it, you could take the funds from this site, put in the housing trust fund, then use it for a township site directly. And those are mechanisms authorized by the municipal land use law and by the Fair Housing Act. So this is, but even some, frankly, oh, by the way, you can't require somebody to give land to a municipality in a zoning ordinance. But with an incentive, you can allow it. And if somebody decides with the incentive here to dedicate it to the township itself, that would be the incentive to go to the 5%, okay? That hasn't happened here. It has not been dedicated to the township. The 88 acres is dedicated to private open space, so that, for that property is not, that incentive has not been selected. And the township has some other zones that have allowed this or encouraged this. And a good example is the Town Center Limited Business Zone that the Stop and Shop is located in, resulted in the dedication of the green space between Stop and Shop and the property we're just talking about today, the Sparta Pharmacy property that is along Route 517 and in the valley behind the cemetery was dedicated as part of an incentive open space provision of that zone. And that zone had like, I don't remember a precise number, but I think it's something like a 4% coverage. But if they dedicated that land to the Township of Sparta, a 7% coverage. And the 7% coverage was focused onto the Stop and Shop property and the Anthony and Frank's Pizza or whatever, and the corner property over here, which could be developed at a higher coverage than, because they dedicated that land to the township. Okay, so similarly, something could happen here like that. It's not, doesn't look like it's going to happen since it didn't happen on the Golden Dome property. So that's sort of the zone that you're dealing with, and Catherine has some suggestions for you, I guess, about ideas. So.
Can I ask one quick follow-up? So is it for the
Bless you.
affordable housing 7%, is it simply the contribution of funds or the grants, or is it actually the building of the affordable housing?
There are ways to do either or both, okay? And sometimes, I don't think it'll happen here, but sometimes somebody says, well, I have another property in town, and I would like to offer to do 100% inclusionary or 50% inclusionary or dedicated to a group home or a variety of things. And if the township was satisfied that that credit was beneficial enough to the township to justify increasing the coverage to 7%, the township could so entertain that, the governing body and the planning board, but the governing body would control.
Okay. Is there a formula for?
There's no guidelines about what that would be. It just leaves it up to the town council and the board to say that it's satisfactory or not. And I will note that, Tom brought up some other scenarios rather than like the actual physical building or utilizing another site or whatever. But for any non-residential properties, there's what's called a development fee, a non-residential development fee. So they're automatically required to provide that if there is a change in the assessed valuation based on the building. It's a 2.5% fee of the total valuation. So for some commercial properties, that ends up being pretty large. So I think that in order for this incentive to really be considered, if it ever is just come to fruition, it would have to exceed that 2.5%, to be beyond what would normally be provided, Is anyone else?
It is not a zone that allows housing in the zone. None of those three zones allow housing as a permitted use, and that is not what is authorized there by that incentive.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
If I could, just to kind of put it in context, and my numbers could be a little different than yours, Catherine. I think we're probably off by, a couple of percentage, but, if they were to use the open space dedication incentive on the two lots So the one lot, I think we said it's about, that one lot would, right now, standard, you could have 206,000 square feet of impervious coverage. With the open space dedication, where they would have to do the open space and give it to the town, that would allow the 206 to go up to somewhere, I'm gonna guess around 350,000 square feet. If they were to do the 7% for the affordable housing, that would allow the 206, based on the standard, to increase to 500 and say around 500,000 square feet. So they're big jumps, and they're not minuscule. So, you know, when I look at that, and again, that's impervious coverage. That is not just building size. That includes the buildings, the parking, and everything. But that's still some pretty big numbers. And again, if we're looking at the economic development zone, PDRM1 and PDRM2, trying to make them consistent, and there are some differences with the open space. I still think there's some rationale, at least at the standard, the 3%, to keep it at the 175, and maybe have some more discussion around the two incentives in terms of, you know, do we think that it really contribute to the zones there? I think when I went back and I looked at the master plan amendments for these two zones, it didn't talk about either one of these that I saw. So that's come somewhere after the fact, and I can't figure out where that came in. So I want to look at that a little bit more. So that's just a thought on the size. Again, I think there's some value in keeping them consistent. I think there's still, you know, 175,000 square feet of any, just for building size again. That's probably within the standard already, so, but it just, again, makes it consistent with the other two zones.
So, yes, thank you, Ron, for providing the other coverage. I was going to get to them,
Oh, sorry.
just in case we wanted to talk through them and what those might look like. As Tom mentioned, you know, those are not as of right. They're things that require some input from the town, but nevertheless, they are something to consider. What I do want to consider, and I appreciate, Ron and I spoke about this too, and we had a very thorough discussion when we did the ED and PDRM1 zone as well. And my only kind of conclusion from the analysis that I will say, or my advice, is really that, you know, the 3% as of right is a total coverage allowance. It includes the requirement, or what would be required for a building is not just the building coverage. So that totally can't be taken up by building. There has to be roads, parking, other impervious coverage, you know, pads for generators, et cetera, that will add up. Generally, you know, that could be 40, 50% of the site. So I only hold up about, and I knew going into this analysis, some of the considerations and some of the what we would be looking at. We weren't just saying, hey, let's look at the whole zone and what can we take apart and what can we add and what can we take out. It was really limited to some of those changes that we saw in the ED and PDRM1 zone, which were building coverage, some of the design standards, and the impact studies. So that's kind of what the purview of what this was. And so in my opinion, you know, if we put in a hard number like 175, that's already creeping up to what the 3% is, it's far in excess, actually, of what would be allowed right now as far as building coverage, even though it's not prescribed in this ordinance, even though that the plan development prescribes only the impervious coverage you back into. You'd be really hard-pressed to find a building that could be 175,000 square feet with only 4,000 square feet of driveway and parking to support that building. So my only kind of hesitancy about putting that in is that you're providing a cap that's, you know, far in excess of what is actually allowed right now by a proportion. So I don't necessarily
And that would be based on the 3%, right?
Correct. So I think that, you know, I wouldn't want to give someone who's reading the ordinance a false sense that they could get up to that port, or they come in because they see that number and they request a variance up to that number because they think that it's a guiding number of some sort. I think the proportionality right now, based on the 3%, is a pretty good ceiling in coverage in general for the site. And that's just based on my analysis. I know I went in with the considerations of, like I said, the purview of what I was looking in this analysis. And that was simply, when I saw the numbers, when I saw the hard numbers of the lot area versus the 3% coverage, it struck me that the total coverage was very close to the building coverage we were considering. And it brought me back to when we actually did do the ED and PDRM1 zones 2 or 3 years ago now. The subcommittee that met on that and spoke about that, we actually were like, why don't we do the PDRM2 zone? It's right next door. And Tom had brought up exactly this, which is, I mean, those were big chunks to bite off anyway, but Tom had said, hey, the PDRM2 zone actually has a lot of protections. We didn't go through them really thoroughly, but Tom was very familiar with them, and he said, you know, let's not touch that zone because it's so different, and it's got all these protections, and it's based on the plan development under the MLUL, so I think we're good. And as I revisited this, you know, Tom's voice was in my head, and I was like, you know, he's right. We didn't talk about hard numbers back then, but he was right. So that's my only advice. I think, you know, that's my guidance to the board. You guys control your destiny and make decisions about how you want to change the ordinance. But as far as building coverage, I do think that the ordinance right now, under my opinion, is that it's pretty good.
But at the 3%, so if they gave money for affordable housing, and you got to the 7%, that would be 500,000 square feet of impervious coverage. What size building could be put on that?
I mean, if you look at it like a 50%, that could be 250, right? If you look at 50% building, 50% impervious, it's usually small. It's usually a bigger share of impervious building, but you could look at it from that lens of like a hypothetical 50-50 share. Again, though, those are things that the township would have to, they're not just considering a gift of affordable housing, they're considering what the implications of that would be. So I think that one of the alternates we could look at is capping the building coverage based on the incentives, because an incentive is just a bonus anyway. So if we did want to consider that building size cap, it could be fit into that incentive, the same way it was in one of the town center zones we were looking at. It was like, if you do this, then. So, but I think it's already indirectly considered in that the incentives weren't written as of right. They weren't like, okay, if you have a 150-acre site, you get this incentive. It's, we have to have a conversation. The township needs to weigh its options. Is the extra 4% in coverage really worth whatever affordable housing benefit we're going to get? How is it going to benefit the town? And that's ultimately why it's not an as-of-right standard. It's not something you just get for having a certain lot size or a lot in a certain area. You have to work with the town, and the town can negotiate that and work and weigh the risks, the pros and cons, essentially. So, like I said, you can fit in kind of a building max, but that may also kind of dull the incentive, the whole point of the incentive, essentially.
So one other thing, again, along these lines, I think just to make sure everyone understands, you know, I think when people think of these big buildings, they think of distribution centers, fulfillment centers, and that kind of stuff. So that stuff's already under the ordinance was updated to say that those are unallowable. So what we're really talking here are big storage buildings, low-intensity traffic buildings. So I want to make sure when people see these numbers, they're framing it correctly in their head. So I've been going back and forth on what you said, and I'm still concerned with the bigger buildings, if those incentives kick in. But the other things we talked about, maybe, why don't you bring them up?
Sure,
There's two other
sure.
ideas that were out there.
So again, you know, I think we did some really good work when we worked on the ED and PDRM1 zone, and that, you know, that subcommittee met pretty often and discussed. Actually, before the state had given their warehouse guidance, we were making considerations that I think preceded that. And then when we saw that guidance, we had already made some of those kind of leaps. So I think we did a really good job in considering ways to, you know, mitigate impact. One of those was, and you know, I'll talk about this one more, even though it was in the back of my mind, but as I started to do the analysis, it was something that I think is a very good idea, and a recommendation I have is that we had put in development standards for storage and warehouse uses in both the ED and PDRM1 zone, meaning that there were, in order to, because we had we basically imposed a prohibition on anything besides a traditional dwell warehouse. We didn't want to permit fulfillment centers, distribution centers, some of those like kind of bigger, higher volume, higher impact warehouse uses, which weren't previously contemplated by a lot of municipalities, and the warehouse guidance from the state really said you should start to define these and refine them in your ordinances, which we did. We had put in basically, we wanted, there was not just in name only, but in actual design and standards, we based, a ratio of the dock doors, where the dock doors would be located on the building, because a lot of those, the number of dock doors and where they're located, if they're around more than one side of the building, those generally lend themselves to these uses that we had prohibited. So distribution centers, fulfillment centers, cross-dock warehouses, things that have high turnover, high traffic, et cetera. And so we limited the dock doors based on a ratio. We made sure that there was no tractor trailer queuing or off-site in the right-of-ways to make sure there was no additional traffic impact outside of the site. We made sure there was ingress and egress throughout the site that was adequate, that there was adequate tractor trailer parking on the site, so not just the dock doors, but tractor trailers had a place to stage so they weren't waiting on the road. That there was adequate parking space size for tractor trailers because we didn't have that in our ordinance. That we made sure that there was no idling, that there was DEP signage, and pursuant to the DEP standards, that there was no truck idling. We limited the number of building tenants based on how you could break up a building, so a larger building couldn't be tenanted by too many tenants. We added landscape requirements. We added design standards, so about building design. We just saw it in the ED zone. We had the Behringer Corp about the materials that could be used on the sign, on the facades, and the design, so that there were more, higher quality materials, more resistant materials that will last throughout time. That there was particular kind of focal points on the building, like an entryway, ways to reduce building massing if it was a bigger building. So I think all of those design standards essentially could get carried over. We could just copy them into the PDRM2 zone because
That's given it the consistency. Just-
correct. So there would be consistency
They're all the
amongst
same.
these zones. They're all pretty much adjacent to one another. They all do. We did carry over the language already about the uses, about storage warehouses being permitted and the other ones being prohibited. So this would only enforce the same standards that are currently being enforced in the neighboring zones.
Catherine, can you clarify, you got the last sentence you said? So the copy over design standards is one thing. What you said right after that, though, is the uses, about the high-impact uses for PDRM2.
We already did.
That's already done?
We already did that. So the one section that was in the ordinance that changed the PDRM1 and the ED zone, there was one ordinance section, like a one clause that basically changed the existing warehouse and storage uses in the PDRM2, the same language that was in all of them, and modified it to say the same thing that says, let me read it real quick. Storage buildings and warehousing with wholesale storage subject to the definition of warehouse, which shall not include distribution center uses, fulfillment centers, parcel hubs, standalone or outdoor storage of any kind, standalone parking facilities. So it was basically, and it also carried over the same prohibited uses that we did in those zones. So that is all consistent, and I think as a matter of making sure that the same kind of provisions that not only the state recommends, but we as a township recommended a few years ago with some good foresight should be carried over to this zone as well. And then in a similar vein, under both the ED and the PDRM1 zones, we required certain impact studies. So an environmental impact study, which is already required by the general township zoning ordinance for site plans. But we just basically bolstered it in that it was in the zone, so you'd see it. Wasn't tucked away in the other ordinances. We added specific traffic impact study requirements for warehouse and industrial uses. Again, I think that would be helpful to carry over here for the same reasons I said about the design standards, to guarantee that we're looking at the warehouse uses that are permitted and not some of the ones that we prohibit. And it's not just in name only. And then finally, there was a blank section, or a placeholder section, in the ordinance at the time for community impact statements. So we actually did, in the ordinance change, one of the provisions was to make sure that was filled with an actual requirement for a community impact statement, again, for all preliminary site plans, but we also added it to the PDRM1 and the ED zone, and I think we can just do the same thing here. It was a section called impact studies.
Required impacts.
Required impact studies, and then it listed out environmental impact, traffic impact, and community impact. And I think, again, we could just copy them over and put them into this zone for consistency.
And if I could, and what that did, especially, let's just talk traffic for a minute, because if you look at PRM2 zone, this is all going to feed onto Route 15. And so what the required statements do is it set some parameters. So it's in terms of here's the requirement you have to meet, here's the data you're required to give us to quantify that what you're really proposing here is really a storage warehouse and not something else, but calling it a storage warehouse. So it gives us the data we need to look at it. And similar to the economic development zone, PDRM2, if there's a change in tenant, because a lot of these buildings are built on speculation, says they have to come before the full board with the new tenant. So it just gives us more data to look at it, to quantify or qualify that, yeah, this really is a long-term storage that doesn't have a high traffic intensity or turnover of inventory.
Come on, you sound like me.
I'm learning from the best.
Thank you. So yeah, as Ron said, that was the thought process when we did it in the ED zone and the PDRM1 zone, and it's exactly as he said. And I think it'd be beneficial to bring over to the PDRM2 zone.
I'm sorry, what were the other elements of the required impact studies besides traffic?
Environmental
Oh, environmental.
and community impact.
In community, I think it looked at things like jobs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, community impact statements, they're not
Yeah.
they're not well respected, and as a planner, I think that they're very valuable. But they work around a lot of parameters about municipal data, census data, population impact, facilities impact, services. But I think they can be really helpful. They can tell a really good story, and whether or not you agree with how it was prepared is even more fodder for conversation to say, I disagree with the number you used, I disagree with whatever the tax valuation number you used in there. I think they're really helpful, especially for bigger uses that could have a tax impact or jobs impact or services impact, like police, fire, et cetera.
How much teeth do those three studies or impact statements have in terms of the process?
I'd say community has the lowest teeth for the reasons that I stated, that a lot of the levers that you put in those studies could affect the outcomes that are testified to. I think traffic has one of the higher allowances, and that traffic is a public safety issue. And some of the teeth that we did put in that about mitigating level of service, we got ahead of it. It's not just like, oh, we have level of service D and that's what it is. We put in kind of provisions that say you need to worry about impacted intersections, and you need to worry about level of service from the get-go. Whether it's the existing condition or what your built condition is. And I think environmental impacts has teeth in that it requires the applicant to provide, they have the burden of proof for all that information, whether it be endangered species, proximity to the aquifer, all those things are all outlined. Actually, we have a very robust section on what's required as part of an environmental impact statement. And so, one, I think it gives the planning board a lot of leeway to request that data, even if they do provide an EIS. If it's not up to snuff based on the ordinance, I think it gives them this board a lot of leeway to request more information. And I also think it does have impact on decision-making from that information.
In the development standards, is it possible to limit the types of trucks?
So, you mean like size of truck?
Yeah, is there anything that says we can't do that?
So I'd have to think about that further, because there's things that could potentially conflict. So if you allow a parking space to be 10 by 50, but you allow a truck to only be 30 feet long, we got an issue. So there are things that potentially could have conflict. We do, we do more about use of trucks rather than size of trucks here. I don't know if, legal question, I don't know if
I would say probably not, Joan, because DOT, both state and federal, regulate trucks, and they actually, they actually not only regulate them, they permit them, and they permit them to go on any federal and state highways. And so if you try to prevent trucks from using state roads or town roads, you really have limited authority. In fact, in town roads, the only way you can even do something about it is to try to have what's called a weight limit.
Yeah, that's.
And you
tonnage.
have to have a study that justifies the weight limit, and then you have to adopt an ordinance, and then you have to put up signs, and then you have to enforce it. And so that helps you see that towns have no authority to regulate how big a truck can be or what kind of truck can go on a road.
But we can't put in a weight limit.
Not really.
not gonna stop them
Not
from
in
going.
zoning, not in zoning, and when you do it on roads, it has to have a basis. The bridge on the road can take no more than 4 tons, or the surface of the road is not suitable to take more than 4 tons, and by the way, that's even debatable how enforceable that is, but the point I'm trying to get at is zoning doesn't regulate trucks, trains, planes. It regulates uses and property. That helps you see the big picture, I think.
I think one thing along those lines that's important to realize too is, when you look at the PDRM1 and the PDRM2 zones, they're right next to each other, and they run down Houses Corner Road. So one of the requirements of the PDRM2 ordinance, from a truck perspective, is trucks can only enter PDRM2 through a road that's being built from PDRM1. So they can't travel up and down Houses Corner Road. There'll be an entrance at the bottom towards 15 that they will enter, and then they would drive up into the zone from there. What that doesn't address is, once they leave there, where do they go? But at least the concentrated effort right there, you're not going to see that traffic on Houses Corner Road based on the way the ordinance is put together today.
The current ordinance at the entrance to, well, it used to be Grinnell, I think it's Interlock now, or whatever it's called, there's a no left turn sign for trucks there.
Yes.
There's a truck weight limit going north on Houses Corner Road. They're basically allowed to go as far as Interlock, because they. Nicolak, yeah,
Yeah.
because they have to be provided access to that industrial place. So what we're trying to do is actually bring that back to closer to 15.
So the zone, the PDRM1 zone starts at 15 and goes up to, along Houses Corner Road, on the left side of Houses Corner Road. In fact, it's good to drive by that area, get a sense of how big the area is, and it's hard to see the land down below Houses Corner Road because of the elevation change caused by the nature and also the 80 years of soil removal at the Kasdeba property along the railroad. It's basically almost invisible from Houses Corner Road. But the concept of the 2 zones is, which they used to be ED zones, is to require a road to come in by the church, go through the first property, then to Nicolak, then through Nicolak, then through the next property, then through to the Golden Dome property as a long cul-de-sac that would service those industrial and economic development uses in the valley along the railroad, but accessing Houses Corner by the church and with no left turn for trucks at that intersection. And that is required in the ordinance. So it would be an improvement even over the current situation. And there would be no use, theoretically, no further use of the driveway that Kasdeba's built up by West Mountain Road that is probably a 20% grade going down to the former soil removal operation. So it should not be used as part of, there should not be another road connecting to Houses Corner Road after this road is built.
One more clarification, if I can, then, I want to make sure the public has a chance to weigh in too, but just want to talk about the open space dedication to make sure that I understand it right, and that we can all walk away with the same understanding. So, You know, we talked about the 3%, which basically gives you the 175, give or take, 10,000 feet here or there. Then you get to the open space dedication, which basically takes it, the 175 up to, we'll call it 350 or 360,000 square feet. The way you get that is, either way, if I understand it right, the developer has to have that open space there. It's the requirement to have that space at the same levels is there. Where you get the incentive is if they take that open space and dedicate it to the town. So that's, if I understand it right, that's the difference. Am I understanding
That's
that right?
correct, that's
Okay.
correct.
So the open space will be there. It's just a matter, does the developer own it or does the town own it?
And that's,
There's going to be less open space, though, if it's 5% developable versus 3, right? So
well, no, now we're talking about
The 55%.
dedicated, restricted, preserved open space as opposed to yard space or grass space or landscape on your property. That is not open space in the context of this requirement. The opposite of impervious coverage is pervious coverage. The opposite of impervious is really green space, but it means on the lot that you're dealing with. This zone is a much larger green space on the individual lots than the PDRM1 zone or the ED zone. Even though there's also the open space requirement. And what I told you before, and I'll remind you, is you can't force someone, you can require open space, public or private, in a planned development. It's one of the great features of municipal land use law for planned developments, is to allow requirements for open space, dedicated, restricted, preserved open space, but only that it's either public or private, and you can't force someone to give it to the public. You can have incentive zoning that triggers an incentive to give it to the public if they get something in exchange for that. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be this particular arrangement. But as I said before, this one, the first tract, the Golden Dome tract, did not result in public open space. It resulted in private open space. So that's 3%. That's set. I don't think that's going to change to become 5% I don't think it's going to be dedicated to the township.
You get 5% more.
Only if you
allowable
dedicate,
buildable
you only
area.
get a couple more percent if you dedicate it to the township of Sparta, and it hasn't happened, and it's probably not going to happen because it's already been exercised as a private open space. So, but tonight, you have the 3 topics. I mean, I respect everything that Catherine said, and I don't have any overriding problem with you just taking the 175 maximum total buildings from the PDRM1 zone and use it in the PDRM2 zone. It's a cap that probably never get reached, but if you like that, you could add that. You probably should add the design standards that she talked about, and you probably should add the impact statement standards. They're fine-tuning of things that help in your reviews. It's not that hard of a lift. You basically, Catherine would write a red line version of that ordinance with those 3 inserts. I think you could even just do it as graphic, as just a amendment to the zone. I don't even think you have to redo the whole zone. That might be cheaper in terms of paper and cheaper in terms of time. And if you recommend it to the governing body can introduce it and adopt it if they want to. So, but maybe that Catherine should write it up too. That might help, because then you see it in black and white, or I'm sorry, black, white, and red, or blue, or something. So, but we should open to the public, Mr. Chairman, and we
Yeah,
should.
if I could. Any members from the public have any comments or thoughts on what you heard on the PDRM2 tonight? Okay, so seeing none, the suggestion is, as Tom says, tonight was to kind of just describe what it is we're trying to do, get some thoughts out there, make sure we all leave with the same understanding of what it is we're trying to do. So I'd like to try to get this on the agenda for, to bring it to a head and get it to a vote. So let me talk to Doreen. If I'm hesitating, 'cause I'd like to do it at the next meeting, but I'm probably not going to make the next meeting, and I really would like to be part of this discussion. If the group wants to go ahead and do it without me, I'd be okay with that too, but I'd like to be part of the discussion, to bring it, to bring
Well,
us to.
it's a little close to do it by 2 weeks, the 16th, anyway.
Okay.
Because Catherine should have some time to craft it.
Yep.
Then she would pass it around to at least me and Dave, and then.
Okay.
Then it might get to the board, and so you probably, I think you need something like a month or something like that.
Okay.
I don't know what Catherine thinks, but that's what I think.
Thank you, Tom. Yes.
Does that sound reasonable?
If it was me, I'd say it.
When's the, when's,
little red line.
when's the meeting after the November meeting?
6th.
November 6th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, a note of caution too, the second November meeting, the 20th.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have that on our calendar or not, but typically,
That's the league, yeah.
League of Municipalities, typically, I'm not sure if we canceled that back in January already. We did, okay. So we're only looking at one November meeting, so we just have to keep that in mind. I think it is important to move this as
Yeah,
quickly as we can.
I agree. So let's put on the agenda for the November 6th meeting with the intent that we're going to try to bring this to closure. And if so, we can get something to the town council as a recommendation. Okay?
Yeah.
Does this
All right.
then, because we introduced it today, can we vote on the 6th?
We don't have, that's
Don't
the
vote.
governing body that has the introduction
move it forward.
concept.
Same
and
night.
the,
Same- okay.
We can,
yeah.
Okay.
planning board can do it same night, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to clarify, the building height, if we add that restriction, or the building size restriction, for practical purposes, it really would only kick in or have an impact if one of those two incentives are being
5%,
exercised,
yeah.
most likely, right?
I don't even, I mean, I'll defer to, if you're concerned about it, it probably is a cap that isn't necessary, but it will be, but it'll at least be a known cap, right? Why do I say that? Because these numbers that you're using are total coverage, they're not the building. They're like every single piece of coverage, including the building. And so, once you get a big building, you start to have a lot of parking, okay? You can't avoid it. And so, but you're trying to make the three zones similar, and the concept of having a similar cap makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next section. Again, look at the time. I'm going to try to shortcut some of these if we can. So the next section would be updates. So Deputy Mayor Blumetti, any town council updates?
Yeah, I have 4 updates, quick ones. Ordinance 2413 was passed. These are the last 2 meetings, by the way, establishing the filming policy and procedures. I'm sure you've been hearing about that over months now, about being film-ready, so that ordinance passed to set up processes and guidelines for filming events in the township. Second one is we began holding a public discussion, the first of many to come, about exploring potential cannabis businesses and uses in town. That would obviously, at some point, involve the planning board, and I'm pushing hard to make sure that happens in terms of especially locations, zones, and all that. Third is we appointed a student liaison for this year to the Environmental Commission. That's a school year appointment of a liaison. So we have a senior from Pope John. And then lastly, last meeting, if you're interested, it'd be good to go back and watch the live stream recording. There was a presentation and a discussion regarding the AO Polymer Superfund site that is near Station Park. And it was about the remediation progress and confirming its safety. And it was led by representatives from both the US EPA and also Equal Sciences, which is an environmental services firm that was retained by the township to review and validate the history and the studies and the reporting of the EPA. And they did confirm that, their opinion was that it was accurate and it was complete. But it's interesting discussion if you want to go back and watch that on the live stream. And that concludes my report for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, sir. In terms of the Environmental Commission, Ms. Dunbar is not here tonight, so I'm sure we'll get an update at the next meeting. The Master Plan Subcommittee, so we had to reschedule the meeting for this month. We was still scheduled to meet later this month. At the last meeting, everybody saw the hub. The survey is now live, so great job by everybody getting that live as well. And I think there's people doing a lot of good things to get the word out to have people take that survey. So, Jenny did a great article, Celeste, I know you've been very vocal on, so thank you for that. And everyone else involved. So please let people know the survey's out there, and let's get some people, everyone take it. Hopefully everyone on this board's going to go home and do that sometime this week so we can get your thoughts. In terms of the minor site plans subcommittee, Bill's not here tonight. The good news is that we have the July and August minutes will be published with the minutes of the September 18th, which is when they were announced. So as soon as those posted, they'll be up and available for everyone to see. So I think that concludes updates, unless anybody else has anything that you'd like to bring up. Okay. All right, so that gets us down to resolutions. So we have, was it 3 resolutions tonight? So why don't we take them, the first one, take them each at a time. Let me just get the agenda here. So the first resolution is Resolution 2024-18, which was for Planning Board Application 24-714, JVP Ventures. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2024-18?
I have a correction to that.
Okay?
It states in the resolution that Mr. Pasalakwa is, that prior to IPO Properties is the owner of the site. But I pressed him and asked him several times, and he said that the owner of the site, that the deed was transferred in 2023 to 172 Woodport LLC, and that is the current owner.
Not IPO Properties
No,
on page 3?
page 3,
Okay. So what's the name again?
172 Woodport LLC. Now, I don't know if somebody wants to verify that, but that's what he said.
Okay. Or you could make that change, I think.
Okay.
I also have a point to raise on this one. Discussed during the hearing, at least based on my notes, we talked about the waiver for the loading space. And it's mentioned in the resolution on page 6. It's number 12, actually. And the rationale for us offering and granting the waiver was based on the proposed or the planned uses for the various tenant spaces that the applicant testified to. And they stated that these tenants do not receive or distribute materials or merchandise. So the use restriction, in my mind, and that waiver should be specific to an alignment with those tenants. And that's why we justified the waiver, so that if the tenants change, it's possible that the loading space waiver would not be appropriate anymore. So I don't know how I'm not sure how we build that into the resolution. In other words.
Well, it's incorporated by the first condition, which is that you stuck with the representations and testimony you gave at your hearing. See that one? The applicant is bound by their testimony.
So I guess that means then if any of the tenants would
They
change.
really have to,
Right.
they have to be the same type of tenants who don't need a loading dock.
Is that a standard implication in these, that if,
Not really, I mean, it is, if that's what they said, if that's what they were trying to justify their waiver based upon, then That would be what the site is limited to. I don't know whether you could have another condition. I don't know what you're thinking of, Dean.
Yeah, I don't actually have the exact
I- I-
wording. I wanted to
Yeah.
get your opinion on that, because I think we want to protect ourselves that if a tenant changes,
Yeah,
and
it's
that
a little
tenant
hard.
does.
Tenant changes that are the same type of tenant don't trigger anything.
Right.
They don't go to anybody. So they go to the zoning officer at most. In this zone.
Yeah.
In the ED zone, right now, all tenants come to the board. So I think it's pretty protected. I mean, if somebody tried to do a use that was not one of these uses, they'd have to go to this minor site plan subcommittee, and they'd say, can you live with the loading dock the way it is? There are no loading dock, no loading space. And most retail now is living without loading spaces. So this is a retail zone, C1 zone, I think. So I think you're protected, but it would have to be a change in use that would trigger it.
Okay, so,
Every change in use goes to this minor site plan subcommittee.
so it should be picked up there.
It should be.
Correct.
So I'm questioning that, because, typically, when we get an application,
Well, I don't have, I'm not trying to micromanage the whole thing.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's a way you can write a condition that does what you're saying.
I don't want to set an expectation that it's going to be picked up, because
Yeah,
my
I
gut
don't
feels
know
it
that it
probably
is.
would not be picked up.
But the promise, they're the ones that have the problem if they don't have a loading space and they need one. They
Yeah, the
can't.
gym goes out and an auto parts store goes in, they're gonna want a loading
For
dock.
example.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but they're gonna come to us and we're gonna say, well, where are you gonna put the loading dock?
Yeah.
If you're gonna put one in.
Okay.
Tom, is there a way to do a condition that says if there's a change in use, that the owner has the obligation to come to the minor site plan and identify them of this condition? And put the onus on them to notify the
Not
minor
really,
site plan.
no, I
subcommittee.
mean, that's what, you have to trigger, it has to
Yeah.
be a trigger that triggers a minor site plan application.
Yeah.
But there would be for a big change in use that, I don't think you should worry about it. I think it's, you have it based upon what is proposed there. If something comes in that's totally different, they're gonna have to deal with it, and that's what will happen. It just is, there are very few retail shops with loading spaces. And with loading docks, very few. That's the Stop and Shop and the former Grand Union, which was the, now the Job Lots or Ocean State. So if you're thinking of basically, I don't think there's a way to capture that going forward as a known commodity that is required for something. There's no, I can't even think of one use that technically requires it. I mean, he said an auto shop, but it's basically, I don't know what to say. I don't have an idea. So if you have an idea, so you could try to write it, but I'm not sure you could have a condition that helps you with this.
Yeah, I'm comfortable just dropping the motion or the idea.
I would think of it as like, this is what they said, and therefore they must have one if they didn't do what they said. Like, their testimony was they're not gonna need it at all at this property.
Right, right.
It's not just because of the tenants, they don't need one. So then if they do try to put in somebody that needs one, they're violating their own site plan by having the truck take up 2 parking spaces or whatever happens when you don't have a loading space. So I think you've got teeth through the site plan conditions, which is you're not allowed to just use up your parking spaces, and how many times is that getting enforced? I don't know, but if it was a big problem, that's what the zoning officer would do, is give them a notice of violation that you're basically abusing your site plan because you're putting trucks in 4 parking spaces or 6 parking spaces.
Okay. Okay, I'm fine with if others are.
I had one other issue with it, and I'm sorry, I can't reference it now. I saw it on my computer when I read it, but the one we have in front of us is missing every other page.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I can't find it. But it had to do with them being instructor-led gym or fitness studio.
Condition 15, page 7. It is there.
Yes, okay, it is here. So, instructor-led, though, I think we were talking more about having classes, so one instructor and maybe 15 students, and not turning it into a gym, because by just saying instructor-led, you could have an instructor one-on-one, and that would change what our thought pattern was. So I'd just like to add the word instructor-led classes,
Instructor-led.
group classes. Right, as opposed to a trainer, a personal trainer working with somebody at a gym.
Okay. Or you can make that change too, if the board agrees. So that's item 15, page 7. Instructor-led group classes rather than fitness center.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got two changes. One is we're going to look at the change in ownership, and then the other one would be to change the instructor-led to instructor group-led? Is that the wording?
Instructor-led group classes.
Okay. So would anybody like, does anybody else have any comments?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Second?
Do I roll call, please?
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti?
Yes.
Knepper?
Yes.
Joan Furman?
Yes.
Celeste Luciano?
Yes.
Ernie Reichstad?
Yes.
And Chairman Ronde?
Yes. All right, Resolution 2024-18 is passed. We'll move on to Resolution 2024-19, which was planning board application 24-719 for Willow Tree Therapy Services. And this resolution memorializes the approval of that. Let's do comments first. Does anybody have any comments on this one? Okay. Seeing none, would somebody like to make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion that we approve Resolution 2024-19.
I'll second.
Okay. Ms. Fox, roll call, please.
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti?
Yes.
Knepper?
Yes.
Joan Furman?
Yes.
Justin Canella?
Yes.
Celeste Luciano?
Yes.
Ernie Reichstad?
Yes.
And Chairman Ronde?
Yes. All right, Resolution 2024-19 is approved. And so that brings us to the last one, which is Resolution 2024-20, which was for the memorializing the approval of Planning Board Application 24-720 for Admiral Metals. Does anybody have any comments? Okay. Seeing none, would somebody like to make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion, approve.
I'll second.
Okay. Ms. Fox?
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti?
Yes.
Knepper?
Yes.
Joan Furman?
Yes.
Justin Canella?
Yes.
Celeste Luciano?
Yes.
Ernie Reichstad?
Yes.
Chairman Ronde?
Yes. All right, Resolution 2024-20 is approved. So that's, we're coming down the final stretch. So this is the part where we open up to the public for comments on matters not on the agenda and not relating to an application.
Jenny Derricks, Tap into Sparta. I'm going to ask you to go back to that first resolution that you just approved. There's quite a bit of effort to contort the facility into a permitted use by making it a sports center. I don't know if you recall that conversation, because a gym and a fitness center is not permitted in the zone. So that resolution references gym 3 times, even though that's not a permitted use in the zone, and there was a vote taken at this board to make it, to agree that the use was a sports center. So I don't know if that's something that you need to have reflected accurately in the resolution. So that's on page 3, on
we
page
could-
6 and 7.
That might be a good idea to change that to sports center, yeah. So if the board would entertain it, it'd be a motion to change the resolution to reference sports center. I'll work with Dory to make that change.
Okay, do we need to vote on that again, Tom? or-
Yes, you do.
Okay, all right, so, anybody can make motions?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second?
Comments, anybody? Okay, roll call, please.
It's a good catch.
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti?
Yes.
Jeanette Burke?
Yes.
Joan Furman?
Yes.
Celeste Luciano?
Yes.
Ernie Reichstad?
Yes.
Chairman Ronday?
Yes. All right, the motion is approved. All right, so still open to the public. Does anybody else have any comments?
Not traffic related, I promise.
It'd be okay if it was.
No, that's only until 10 o'clock. Quick question, at the beginning of the meeting was it 2 weeks ago? I was watching on YouTube, and there was a comment made when you guys started at executive session before you guys had to stop because it was still recording, about a filing not done on time. My phone died, so I don't have the exact wording of it. But I'd like to know what the repercussions are when our professionals are not doing their, submitting their filings and everything on time, like for the town and also for them as professionals. Because if we're paying them to do something and the filing is not done for whatever reason, and I don't know the background behind it, but what's the fallout for it and how will they be held accountable?
So let me try to answer that. So what you heard was not the complete story.
Okay.
And I can't say too much because it is related to an ongoing hearing, but there's more to what you heard. There's more to the story than what you heard. And we'll continue to have discussions on that, probably in executive session, relative to what's the status, what's going on, and that kind of stuff. But I can't really say much more than that because it is,
But if stuff like that is happening, and I respect that if it's executive session and only certain things can be discussed, like with regular people, but if that's happening, how are people going to be held accountable, and how can that be addressed? And
So again, what you heard was not the complete
Okay.
story, and I can't say more than that.
Okay, my next question is, I think last year, we went out to bid for professionals. Are we doing that again this year, where appropriate, whether it's for, Mr. Collins or whatever, are we doing that again for professionals, or are we just keeping it status quo, or are we doing it next year? Again, I don't know all the lingo, because I usually do town council, not planning board, so my knowledge is limited.
So this board went through the process. We started last year, voted on it this year. It's typically not done every year. The board would have to make a decision that it wanted to pursue that. Right now, there's no action right now to do that.
There's no plans at this point. Okay, I didn't know if it was an annual thing. Again, I don't know how a lot of this stuff works, because I usually do town council. But I was just curious if that was an annual thing, and if it's an annual thing, why nothing had been done for this year, and if it was, a discussion that was being held.
I think what was done before was somewhat unusual because there was a public outcry. But the annual thing is the vote in January as part of the reorganization meeting. But we don't annually go out and solicit, at least to my knowledge, professionals every year. That's a very costly project to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I email you if I think of more questions? Because it's past my bedtime.
I'd rather you not email me, maybe.
Or who can I email? Because if I think of other, follow-ups.
Yeah, I'd like to have any discussion relative to these in the room with the whole board and the professionals present.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, and,
Thanks.
I'd love to talk to you. Maybe we can have coffee sometime, but I just don't like to
Yeah.
talk planning board stuff outside of this room.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thanks.
Letter that she's referring to, I'm sorry, Jenny Derricks, that matter she's referring to is public record, because I have a copy of the filing by Mr. Brady that says, in his own letter, sorry, this is late. So it's not confidential. There's no exclusion to discussing the actual fact that it was late. I'm not going to discuss it. I'm just going to say that document is a public document.
Okay. Appreciate the comment. Any other matters from the public that you'd like to have addressed? Okay, seeing none, again,
Could I put in a request that we go into executive session to discuss the matters that are being brought up? Not now, next time? Because we didn't have really a discussion because the attorney was not here.
I guess, Tom, how does that work in terms of executives? I need some help in terms of,
If you would like Dave Brady to come to an executive session, you could ask him to come to a meeting when he's available.
okay,
And then you go into close for attorney-client privilege communication and pending litigation.
okay,
But
Thank you.
I won't be involved in that because I'm recused on that matter.
okay, all right, thank you. All right, so unless anybody has anything else, I'd like somebody to give a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Seeing none, we adjourn. And again, thank you for everybody for tonight, including the public for